This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. Paul on the Gulfstream with Alex Steele down to Nashville. Hopefully we'll catch up with Paul here in a bit. An eventful Tuesday, to say the least, here. We're going to get to Lisa Mateo with a market update here. Oil south, interest rates coming in as well. But we really have to turn. And, folks, this is to put this in an American phrase, remember the shock of the midterm elections where there was all these certitudes and this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and the pundits were silenced by people in the voting booths across America where they said, well, maybe not, and Mr. Biden and the Democrats did far better than the punditry. So too in India. It's a breaking story, an important story, and we're thrilled that Damian Sassower is with us. Damian, India to so many Americans is a peninsula known as Mumbai or Bombay.
Yes. We
fly in, we're going to India, we get as far as one of the Taj Mahal, whichever fancy hotel, the JW Marriott Mumbai Juhu or whatever. What's really going on in India that you see in the markets?
Well, India's been opening up to the world, Tom. We know this. India's being added to global bond indices. They've been added to global equity indices for some years now. And so, when you see something like this and you see some of these moves in the Nifty 50 down as much as 8.5% overnight, just because Narendra Modi and the BJP, the incumbent party, had a closer than expected election. And now you've got the INR, the currency, off something on the order of 50 basis points today alone, and bonds, the 10-year in India is up 11, 12 basis points. So this is all kind of negative for foreign investors and into India, Tom.
Well, what I thought amazing was I looked at Top Live and our really interior coverage in India for the Indian population, and I saw literacy in some of these districts of 55% and 75%. There are over 20 languages spoken in India. Let's just go to the basics that you deal with every day at
labor and land
reform.
Yeah.
There's no equivalency to China. The idea of compare and contrast of China and India.
And it's a theme people like to play for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But it's all about labor and land reform. What this means is that the incumbent party is going to have that much more difficulty passing through the reforms that are absolutely necessary in order for that economy to grow. And so, as an investor, that kind of it puts you on tenterhooks.
I am going to get out, folks. I don't have time yet. On Twitter and LinkedIn, a superb Bloomberg opinion brief from Mahir Sharma. He's the author of Restart, The Last Chance for the Indian Economy, and we'll get that out. Mahir Sharma with a beautiful summary for you to get up to speed on what's going on. A stunning election where Mr. Modi doesn't get a plurality, he gets some form of coalition.
It's not the only election we've been digesting either, Tom. Mexico, South Africa, we'll get into that.
We'll get into that as we can. Derek Wallbank scheduled to be with us from New Delhi. Now, with our Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studio, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, and we have futures lower. This after Wall Street started the new month with a mixed session. NASDAQ futures, Dow futures and S&P futures all down 0.4%. As far as the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.80%. That's little change. The 10-year yield 4.39%, and that is little change. And you've talked about it. Indian stocks posted the biggest loss in 4 years on its tight election. Adani Group linked companies plunged after gaining almost $20 billion worth of market value yesterday. The rupee slumped. Elections in Mexico, that's pushing the peso lower for a second day. We have the dollar stronger, Japanese yen stronger, euro, British pound weaker, Bitcoin, that's lower at 68,923. The GameStop craze, yes, it is taking a break after Keith Gillicky, roaring kidding, said that he had accumulated a stake in the company. Shares now down more than 1% after jumping 21% yesterday. And the New York Stock Exchange, well, it said it's going to cancel Berkshire Hathaway's bad trades following that software glitch sparked trading halts, falsely displayed 99% drops in companies, including Berkshire. Those shares down 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Yeah, very good, Lisa. Thank you so much. It is legendary at the University of Virginia, the largest birthday party ever in the history of the University of Virginia was on the lawn for Kate Moore. It was only 8, 9, 10 years ago. Joining us now this morning, Kate Moore from BlackRock and our global allocation team. Kate Moore, happy birthday to you.
Oh, thanks, Tom. I must say, it's great to be 29 again.
we're all working. The only one getting
Well
away
done.
with it, Kate Moore, is Damian Sassower. He's cut and chiseled and doing 36 holes on the golf course. Kate Moore, I want you to measure the level of exuberance right now. I see a lot of fancy technical studies that say we're just not as exuberant as 1999. Do you buy it?
Yeah, I don't see a huge amount of exuberance. Actually, let's just talk about exuberance over the course of 2024, right? We had gotten to a pretty excited place by the end of March. Obviously, stocks were putting up big gains. People who had been skeptics around the resilience of the U.S. economy had to throw in that towel. It seemed like everyone was afraid of being underweight or under risked. And I think a lot of that has faded. We had a tougher April. And now we've had a lot of cross currents as companies have reported earnings, some good news and some just okay news, and lots of unexpected sort of changes in the macro environment and in the policy rate expectations. So I would say we're just in a kind of a lukewarm, but not negative, but a lukewarm state at the moment.
Happy birthday, Kate. And I agree with you. Things are far more asymmetric. I mean, they're not as asymmetric. They're far more two-sided, given the move we've seen since mid-April.
Whoa. You're saying there's an asymmetry between 39 and 29? Is that what this is?
No asymmetry there whatsoever. So Ms. Moore, King dollar's flexing its muscles yet again, right? I mean, let's be real here. I mean, this is not a U.S. exceptionalism move. This is a risk-off move. Every single currency in G10 and EM, with the exception of the pound, is now down versus the dollar year to date. Talk to us about King dollar in the current environment.
Yeah, we've had a modest overweight to the dollar throughout the course of this year. Not a huge bet, but just kind of an expectation that U.S. economy was going to be stronger than some of our big trading partners and therefore kind of justified. But I have to say, I think there is a little bit of a risk-off element to it, as you suggest. And there is also an understanding that the U.S. economy is very resilient. And quite a lot of them, both consumer, although that's, people like to debate that, but the consumer data and the corporate data is still really strong. So, I'm not a great currency forecaster, but I wouldn't bet against the dollar, at least in the next few months.
Folks, I really want to bring this to your attention. After Damian talks to Kate Moore of BlackRock, we're thrilled to go to Delhi, and we'll speak to Derek Walbank of Bloomberg News on this stunning election. Damian?
Well, let's stay here, Kate. Let's stay with the U.S. Let's stay with U.S. equities, right? I mean, we've had some pretty big moves in telco and IT year to date. Do we lean into that? I mean, if we had this risk-off move, if things are sort of settling in here, I mean, is this a buying opportunity?
Yeah, Damian, one of the things I will say is I love that the leadership this year is really being driven by fundamentals. I mean, I know there are skeptics out there saying this run can't continue. And yet the companies that are performing the best are those that are putting up earnings during their earnings reporting, have affirmed guidance and oftentimes raised guidance and set higher expectations. These are companies on a really solid path, in some cases on a secular path separate from the business cycle. We're not in a position where people are just kind of hyping up or speculating on what may happen in the future. This technology is here today. These companies are delivering revenues and they're printing cash. So because of that, I would not fade the leadership of these big cap tech anytime soon.
Yeah, but Kate, I mean, value and quality are both down as a strategy year to date, right? I mean, I think it's been the low vol factor. I mean, I'm not going to get into all that because everybody calculates these indices a different way, but equity trend, I mean, that's up 4% year to date. I mean, there seems to be, some technicals at work here, no?
Yeah, there are a lot of technicals. And actually, we pay very close attention to positioning and sentiment to try and time our entry and exit into different positions.
Right.
And we've been using options pretty aggressively given the vol market. We've been given a lot of opportunities to buy very cheap vol and to sell vol when we thought, it was a good opportunity.
Quickly, Kate, we're out of time, but what's the sentiment that you see among fancy people like at hedge funds on big tech? Is there a big tech bet or have they pulled away?
I think they're constructive. For the most part, of course, it's going to depend on the segment. We haven't seen huge shorting of the big names. In fact, no one wants to really stand in front of that train, whether you're a mutual fund investor, a retail investor, or a hedge fund investor. I said, as long as these companies continue to have the fundamentals, Tom, I think it's going to be an important part of your portfolio for the balance of 2024.
29 candles. Kate Moore, happy birthday. Thank you so much for joining us. Just remember always, Kate, you're younger than Michael Barr. Futures at -25 with our news in New York City, the aged Michael Barr.
Dirt is younger than me, and thank you very much. India started counting votes today from its 6-week election. that was seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's decade in power and was expected to give him a third term in office. However, early leads showed fewer seats for Modi's governing party than expected. The preliminary figures showed Modi's BJP ahead in 240 constituencies out of 542, and winning one uncontested race. Counting was to go on throughout the day. A total of 272 seats are needed for a majority in Parliament. President Biden plans to sign an executive order that would effectively prevent new asylum claims until migrant crossings drop by about 2/3 from where they are right now. As of last April, border agents encountered about 4,300 undocumented migrants per day. We get more from Bloomberg's Bill Ferries.
You're talking about, almost more than half of the asylum seekers at the April levels, but we've had levels of 10,000 per day at some points in this crisis. So it would be a real sharp curtailment from what we've seen at kind of the peak periods of the immigration flow across the border.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. Attorney General Merrick Garland will appear before the House Judiciary Committee today. Garland is expected to push back on what he calls a false and dangerous narrative being spread about the Justice Department by Republicans. Dr. Anthony Fauci returned to Capitol Hill to face questions from members of the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. House Republicans grilled Fauci, who served as President Biden's chief medical advisor, on a number of pandemic-era allegations. During the hearing, Fauci denied any cover-ups which he said have resulted in threats against him and his family.
It is very troublesome to me. It is much more troublesome because they've involved my wife and my 3 daughters.
Fauci was questioned for nearly 4 hours. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, and Lisa.
The emerging market, Japan, is front and center here. A little bit of a coverage here in the last 24 hours with lower rates in the U.S. We've seen a little bit of a pullback away from intervention tension. But, I mean, Dennis Gartman yesterday was incendiary, hugely popular. It was amazing to see the audience. Damian, the idea of a third intervention, and what if it fails? They do it again, they spend some money, they intervene, the yen strengthens for 2 cups of Sanka, and then it doesn't, or sake, whichever. Sanka and sake.
It's not really the same
What
thing.
happens, I mean, to Gartman's point of going through 160 to 170, 180, what happens if they fail at intervention a third time?
Well, I mean, now, the news we're talking about is that the BOJ is going to be reducing its bond buys as early as the June meeting. And what that really means is that JGBs, which obviously the BOJ owns them all, I mean, they own all the bonds, Tom. It means that yields are going to rise. And I mean, that's really the risk here. And you can actually trade that. You can trade Euro Yen. You can trade JGB futures. I mean, it's a liquid instrument. And so from a trader perspective, from a risk management perspective, there's a lot to unpack there.
Okay, but the answer is we have to sit with bated breath and wait to see what the institutions of Japan do, and they're delaying and delaying and delaying.
And they're also advocating, I think Suzuki, I forget who it was, Japan's Suzuki said currency intervention has had some impact. I mean, we're not at 160 anymore, Tom,
fair.
I guess. So,
I'll go with that.
But to your point, I think it's just a matter of time until we push it back above.
We will see. Damian Sassower, thank you so much. We have a hugely eventful day for you besides markets on the move, some economic data as well. Our Guy Johnson, he is in a conversation with Boeing's Dave Calhoun, and we'll look for that in 20 minutes as well. Raghuram Rajan will join us in India. Yes. Just honored for that today. Futures up down 25, down negative 157. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. All right, futures pointing to a lower open this morning. We have NASDAQ, Dow, and S&P futures all down about 0.4%. The 2-year yield at 4.79%. That's down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield, 4.38%, and that is little changed. Today, we'll get some insight into the jobs market when the monthly JOLTS data is released at 10 a.m. Wall Street time. Bloomberg Economics, it says it may show job openings fell in April. We'll head over to Intel shares. They're higher this morning, up about 1%. CEO Pat Gelsinger, well, he fired back at NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang's claim that traditional processors like Intel's, they're running out of steam in the age of AI. NVIDIA, they're down about 0.1%. Apple shares lower, down 0.3%. This is after shares rose nearly 1% in yesterday's trading, and that was enough to put the stock back in positive territory for the year. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. We're trying to get Paul Sweeney. He's in transit. I'm not sure we can get him on a Gulfstream right now. They're going down to Nashville. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney down to
Paul was asking me about some
Nashville.
Places in Nashville to make some recommendations there.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Joining us now, and with us yesterday amid pre-election, pre-results calm, is Derek Wallbank. Let me explain that he drives a ship in Singapore and is in New Delhi as our managing editor for Bloomberg News on these historic moments. Derek, as simple as I can, the President of the United States will travel to Paris and to Normandy. There's an expectation. If the President was to travel this morning to Delhi, what would he fly into? What would President Biden expect in the politics of India?
Tom, he would fly into searing heat and a lot more uncertainty than we thought we had. We're in a situation, you know what they always say, yeah, in sports and in politics, that's why they play the game. We're in a situation where all of the exit polls over the weekend were projecting a pretty substantial landslide win for Narendra Modi. That really has not held true. I mean, he looks like his overall alliance is on track for a win, but his specific party might actually have to rely on allies to make up that majority. And that is very much not the position that he thought that he would be in. You know, India is a place that the U.S. has looked to continue to rise on the world stage. Modi was part of that. They hosted the G20 last year.
Right.
You know, you've seen a lot more engagement there, but you know, the big face of India is not in the position he thought he'd be in.
Derek, the former head of the Indian Central Bank at Fiscal, Raghuram Rajan, who's been such a friend of the show, will appear in the 8 o'clock hour. He represents a modern, technocratic, financial India. How does that part of Indian society react to these events today? The people that know and read Professor Rajan.
I think that you are looking at all of the market chatter right now has been about the idea that that this might have a change in fundamentals in India. Right now, the India play has been very sort of infrastructure based. That has been, you know, and anytime you say the word infrastructure with India stocks, you think Adani in your mind. But there's some suggestion now, and you can see this sort of in the markets as it bears it out on your terminals, that the consumer plays have been actually a little bit better, a little more insulated from the, 5 red headlines or something worth of India market action that we've had today. So there is some question that if this is a narrower majority, maybe you have more consumer spend. The other question is how does this go in terms of, you know, India's ratings on various cases. I think that's, you know, something, it's starting to be a point of speculation right now.
Derek, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance, Rahul Gandhi's coalition of 20 parties or so. Where do they sit in this? I think they're poised to win 180 seats. What do they stand for?
Yeah, it's a sort of loose confederation of people who don't like Modi for varying reasons. It's not so much a a movement gathered behind like one person that is specifically advancing a defined specific policy agenda. It's an umbrella group for a lot of people who have differing views with Modi for a lot of various reasons. So it's sort of like
market unfriendly then, Derek. Is that what you're saying? I mean, would the market perceive that as an unfriendly development?
I would define it more in terms of their opposition rather than in their in their support. But like India at this point is getting into a phase where it doesn't just have one person who might be decent for markets. It might be in a slightly different way. You're not taking away the fact that 3 million people are coming online with trading registrations every single month. I mean, this is a market on the make, regardless from a structural level, right? It's not like the country of 1.4 billion people is only reliant on one leader. And I think this is going to be one of those chances that over the next couple of years, we're going to see that play out.
Talk to us about Narendra Modi's nationalist agenda as it relates to the Hindu religion. Talk to us about that. Do you think that had any impact on the results we're seeing here?
Well, I think there's been a lot of things that I sort of put this into a big sort of basket together, where Modi has made a lot of these steps forward, inaugurating a new temple and things like that. When we're looking into some of the results, and you start breaking these down region by region, may not have had the effect that people thought that it was going to have on the electoral calculus.
Derek, down south, where Satya Nadella played cricket, how do they respond to this? How do all the people listening that are part of the Southern India technocratic diaspora, how do they respond to this?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because India is very regional. I think that might not be fully appreciated by people who are outside, but it's a very regional place. You've seen actually the BJP make a couple of inroads in some of these places, but certainly Tamil Nadu, certainly places like Kerala are very much opposition-centric areas. I was actually really, I think my two biggest points of surprise so far looking at the map is Maharashtra outside of Mumbai, as well as Uttar Pradesh, which had been a real BJP stronghold, sort of like kind of to the east and north of New Delhi, had been a real kind of BJP stronghold 5 years ago, and now it's very possible that BJP might not win a majority in that state or of seats in that state. So you have seen a real sort of regional variation. There's a great chart actually on Bloomberg.com. We have all of this broken out nationally. You can flip between the 2024 and the 2019 votes and just see how like all of the orange on the map, which is BJP and allies, sort of flips into blue in some different places and sort of break it down regionally. I recommend.
Derek, thank you. Derek Wallbank with us from New Delhi this morning on this stunning election. And I look at it folded in the election. The one certitude we have about the U.S. election, Damian, is both candidates are as anti-China as you can get.
That's right. I mean,
I don't know if they're pro-India, but certainly we can identify that they're anti-China.
Well, I think the regional divergence you point out in this Indian election is prescient because it's Maharashtra. That's the electoral wild card in the West. You have obviously Tamil Nadu in the South, which is basically the coalition. And then you have Uttar Pradesh, which it looks like the BJP might actually lose, which is just unbelievable.
I want to segue here. It's tough to do, but we're going to do it anyways. Our guy Johnson is really committed to discussions of what we care about, which is the airplanes that we fly, whether it's Airbus or Boeing. We are going in a bit here to a conversation with, I'm going to say, Damian, the most beleaguered executive from sea to shining sea.
My goodness.
Which is Dave Calhoun, the gentleman from Virginia Tech. He is exiting Boeing and is a chief executive the end of this year. But it's got to be the toughest job on the planet to manage on a day-by-day basis.
How many questions do you think he had to field about the potential for Warren Buffett to buy Boeing in the last month alone? It must be getting a little bit wearisome.
Well, it's going to be something to behold, and I'm as guilty as anyone of looking at Boeing as a blue chip giant, 171,000 people, and they're not
orders.
greeting people at the front of Walmart. I mean, they're building stuff.
They're building stuff, real stuff, and they're still getting orders, which is unbelievable. I mean, it just speaks to the moats.
Who
around
else
that
are you going to go to? It's a duopoly,
It's a duopoly,
right?
exactly. So I mean, they're still getting those orders, and whether or not they're going to be able to deliver on them at some point in the very distant future, we will see.
The stock price, folks, is as simple as can be. Call it 100, 150, years and years ago through the pandemic. The beginning of the pandemic, $400 per share, roughly. And down we go. We've been split in two. And we're trading, frankly, Damian, like most of the airline stocks, really down, not at, but somewhat near pandemic lows. A 10-year total return, 5% per year. That doesn't get it done for one of America's blue chips.
Down 29.2% this year alone, Tom. I mean, it's just been a huge move. And so, look, it's been a drag. Certainly, it's been a drag on industrials, but the industrial sector within the S&P is up something on the order of, 8% year to date. So, we'll see. I mean, look, I think there's going to be some interesting happenings out of Guy Johnson's interview. He always gets to the crux of the situation.
Well, he will. But again, within the duopoly that's out there, there are whispers, I believe, from United Airlines. I'm talking uninformed folks, but there's whispers. When do American Airlines start buying Airbus of Toulouse, France? And that's the heart of the matter. And, this is big stuff. Within the economic data, as we look at durable goods, ex-Boeing. I mean, that's how dominant they are.
Well, I mean, I think Turkey just placed an order, or they're considering placing an order with Boeing. I think I read that somewhere. But really, it's been Asia, right? I mean, the demand, and the Middle East, quite frankly. Qatar Airlines, Emirates. Yeah. I mean, that's where the real orders are coming from. And it seems to me that it's a coin toss whether or not it's Boeing or Airbus.
Can I editorialize?
Please.
Last night, 2 nights ago, I can't remember, a 747 flew directly over me going from Newark to Frankfurt. And I'm sorry, it's still Boeing. It's still 4 engines, and it was magnificent.
Do you remember when the Concorde used to fly over Jones Beach,
Yes.
Down into JFK back in the good old days? I mean, for you kids out there who don't know what Coney Island is, you should go out and visit and have a hot dog.
Well, one story on the Concorde that I think is just amazing is I enjoyed a beautiful office with a beautiful view in a town called Boston. And the runway came directly at me from way up. And you'd sit in the morning in the Concorde land, and then it would take off coming directly at us. And basically, it gets up to speed, and then it's not a normal airplane. It's a rocket ship.
I still have nightmares. I still have nightmares. Full disclosure, I grew up in Flushing, Queens, right under where the flights come over to land at LaGuardia. And I, as a little baby, I can remember looking up and just seeing them go over and being scared, calling for my mom.
Well, it's the airline talk that we love. And, of course, Guy Johnson, expert at this, he is going to be with Dave Calhoun in a moment. I think we need, within the turmoil of futures negative 23 and the VIX back out to 14, we probably need a data check. Who can help us with that? Lisa Mateo.
You know it. Good morning, guys. Well, S&P futures down 0.4%. We have Dow futures and NASDAQ futures. They're down 0.3%. We have the 2-year yield at 4.79%. That's little changed. The yield on the 10-year, 4.38%, and that is little changed as well. To commodities, spot gold lower, 2,326 an ounce. We have Brent crude lower, $77 a barrel. WTI crude, $72 a barrel. To earnings we go. We'll start with Bath & Body Works, down about 8%. The company reported adjusted earnings per share for the first quarter. It beat estimates, but here's the thing. Its second quarter outlook, well, that showed demand still uncertain. After the bell, we move on to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, HPE down 1%. And some big airplane moves, since we're talking about airplanes. Sources say Airbus negotiating a major sale of more than 100 aircraft to China. Airbus ADRs down about 0.2%. And then you have Turkish Airlines looking to buy 250 jets from Boeing. Boeing down 0.3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele on their way down to Nashville for some music and some good times. Thank you, BNY Mellon, for their conference down there. Hugely anticipated. And with me, Damian Sassower in the studio. Is there leverage within the system right now? August 1998, a few other moments as well. I don't sense leverage off a ginormous notional value like what we've seen before.
No, I don't. But, there has been talk. I mean, if you listen to Jay Barry at JP Morgan, I mean, he has been talking about the fiscal needs for the United States on a forward basis. And he has been sort of forecasting and running through scenarios and talking about the increased treasury issuance we're going to need to see. And it's not going to be coupon income as much as it's going to be also T-bills that are going up. So it's going to be a lot of short-dated issuance out of the U.S. government in the not foreseeable future. And I think that's all really important when you're trying to weigh where U.S. yields are going here in the near term.
Well, explain this to us. I mean, we all get that if you own short paper, it's safer than long paper.
Maybe.
But in the old days, did they own long paper?
I think, look, the bid for duration, people are still a little bit reluctant to move further out on the yield curve, and rightfully so. I mean, they've made a lot more money just, buying short-dated paper and rolling it over and clipping coupons, Tom. And I think, so until that changes, until those returns go down, people are still going to do that. Again, you get paid to carry in the front end of the curves. It's just, for me, it's going to be a wait-and-see mode. If something's going to break here. And I mean, you hear Steve Englander at Standard Chartered talking about payrolls and the impact of migrants on payrolls. If something's going to break, it's going to show up in the data.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because the heart of the matter, Damian, is the job market hasn't broken yet. And every central bank is an ex-post entity, folks. They must wait to see that event. Will we see it on Friday? I'm sort of hearing not really, but maybe. But the answer is it hasn't broken claims or all the job statistics.
Well, the real experiment is going to be tomorrow with the ECB, Tom, and we know this. The experiment is this, can the ECB cut rates? I mean, they are going to cut. They've told the markets they're going to cut. But the data, the inflation data that we just saw out of Europe was not very dovish in my mind. I mean, so it's kind of an experiment, right? Growth is obviously sluggish in the Europe relative to the U.S. Can this cut really jolt the growth element, the growth side of that equation? I mean, it's going to be interesting to see.
Well, it's
an experiment.
It, folks, in the last couple of days, pullback, and the answer is we barely pulled back. I mean, levels here on futures right now, 52.74. SPX is barely a drawdown. Dow 38,000. NASDAQ 18,000. Let's fold it into economic data right now. Jennifer Lee, BMO, joins us now as we wait for Guy Johnson and a timely conversation with Boeing. Jen Lee, thank you so much for coming in early. She is senior economist at BMO Capital Markets. You're the first one I've talked to on a Tuesday getting to Friday. What is your gaming of the jobs report on Friday?
So good morning. So we are looking for, I'm just going to put my glasses up here, 170,000 gain. Oh my gosh, my eyes are so bad now. And for a steady jobless rate, that slowing, it's clearly slowed the labor market demand from the first quarter. It's still strong by, I think, in any measure, but compared to what we've seen in the past, half year or so, job demand has certainly slowed, and this is what the Fed is hoping to see. Hopefully, we're not going to see cutting of jobs, but at least there is a steady slowing of job demand.
Okay, fine. It's a steady slowing. I get the steady part, but when does it break? I don't sense it breaking Friday. You're going to tell me otherwise?
I don't think it's going to break Friday, and I'm not sure how to define breaking unless we're seeing a big negative sign, which stringent things have happened, but it's highly doubtful. 170,000 again, by any stretch is still a decent figure, but as the economy is slowing, employers are starting to pare back on what they're demanding in terms of what their needs are for their workforce. They're either going to keep using everyone that they have there and probably just sort of cool back on their expectations until they see how the economy is going to unfold for the rest of the year. And when we finally see those long-awaited Fed cuts.
Jennifer, what are your expectations for the ECB tomorrow? Off the back of that, what do you think the euro is actually going to do here versus the dollar?
So we are looking for it's been the ECB has basically hammered it in everyone's head that, we're going to cut on 25 basis points on Thursday. And so I think that's sort of like a done deal. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of reaction from the euro in terms of the announcement itself. What is more important is what the press release will say in terms of hints about what's coming down the road, and especially whatever President Lagarde talks about during her press conference and how comfortable she's going to be about, and then she's going to be like, really,
Jen,
it's going to be a very tough spot.
Let's come back to Jennifer Lee right now of BMO Capital Markets in Berlin for America. A timely conversation, Mr. Calhoun of Boeing, with our Guy Johnson.
As long as it's going to take.
Yep.
And one of the flaws any of us can get into is to predict that moment. But I can predict circumstances that will define those moments. Everybody knows when this started. It was with a couple of horrific accidents where lives were lost. A company at that moment in time had a very difficult experience. What I call the lack of transparency, the unwillingness to take responsibility immediately. And I've been candid about that. I believe transparency of all things and relative to all cultures is about the most powerful word I've ever seen. Any company, especially large-scale companies who are willing to be transparent about everything, they'll suffer less. Because the minute you start to hide something in a big company, others notice and they might hide. And I'm not suggesting there was nefarious or anything of the sort. But transparency is like the most critical thing in the world. And when we started this, what I call the recovery moment, which was beginning of 2020, we made wholesale changes to the leadership team. We made wholesale changes, began wholesale changes to the board. We stopped production of the MAX 100%. So we went a full year and a month without producing a single airplane. Created a safety office based on lots of experiences that the FAA had working directly with airlines. Ironically, they mandated a safety management system for airlines, but not yet for the manufacturers of the supply chain in the industry. So we decided we would take that, we would learn everything that we could, create a safety office, and most importantly in that is stay tuned to the fleet, know what it's doing every day, all day, and then be transparent about everything you see and get good at that. So take that forward. And this is where I'll start to approach the experience we had with Alaska Airlines, which was the depressurization event and the escape of the door. So our supply chain and ourselves started production in the first month of 2021 from a rate of 0. And a workforce, while we hadn't laid it off, we had moved it to a whole variety of places around our factories, and then we had to move them back and remobilize all of that effort. At the same time, I haven't even mentioned COVID. That happened. So demand for airplanes fell precipitously, we know that. It also shut down our 2 factories because the first case in the US was right between them, literally. So we had a moment that's hard to describe, but then we had to begin the mobilization. And I would agree with everything Guillaume said about the supply chain and the ramifications of COVID on the supply chain. The turnover of experienced people, the loss of really important skills, and them coming back in a much slower and maybe a bigger word, sporadic pace than any of us had hoped for. Maybe we should have expected it, but at least we were hoping for better than that. So for 21 and 22 and 23, we were gradually bringing up the rates. Demand for airplanes came back faster than any of us ever imagined it would, and it came back in a robust way. We were increasing our rates, but a little bit of an issue began to arise. You may know, when nonconformance gets to your factory and you have the capability to fix it, you do. And you can do one of those and you do 2 of those, but when it starts to overwhelm the positions in your factory and you're doing more and more of that kind of work, or simply trying to accommodate a part that didn't show up.
Yep.
Didn't show up when it was supposed to be in position 2, let's do it in position 4. So this happens and it migrates into the factory. And I will say, while it was not the specific cause to Alaska, in my view, it was the systemic cause. It was the issue that created the opportunity, a little bad behavior without a doubt on the part of somebody who we don't know yet, but it created an opportunity in the last position of a factory to then allow for an escape, which we are not allowed to do and never will be allowed to do. So that was sort of a short story of a long set of issues. But what do you do when this stuff happens? You know, this is what I love about the industry, just for what it's worth. 1989, a United Airlines lost aircraft in Sioux City, Iowa, and there were Many fatalities. I was at GE. It was a total moment for GE on the subject of safety, a complete overhaul of the business, the company, its approach to engineering, the maturity of design practices, and the allegiance to the skills that are required to perfect and mature a design practice. Lots of details, but it was an overhaul of the entire company. And I also remember when I came in as CEO at the end of the next decade, 1990s, it's like it happened yesterday. Every employee remembered it, they understood it. Their commitment design practices always started with a brief discussion on what happened in Sioux City.
Yep.
That's going to be us. That's going to be us. And I don't know exactly when that moment is when we're starting to feel really stable. I think in the engineering world and our commitment in the design space, human factors, all the things that led to the real tragedies at Lion Air and in Ethiopia, I believe that those fixes are in place, and now we're maturing, and we don't forget. And now I think in this Alaska moment and the escape that we got from our factory, I think the comprehensiveness of our plan, our willingness to take responsibility in the first instance, sent a clear message to all of our company that transparency will be paramount in this process. We presented this comprehensive plan to our regulator. Here's one thing I want to make sure everybody understands. This is our plan, it's not our regulator's plan. This is our plan, it's not our regulator's plan. They will provide oversight like they do, and they will regulate us, but it has to be us. We got to believe in it. We got to love it. We got to want to do it. And we got to take the pain that goes with slowing down the factory. We got to take the pain. And if we slow it down and stick to the disciplines that will synchronize this supply chain with the insatiable demand for airplanes and stay disciplined on that, we will put all this in a rearview mirror, and we will be way better for it. And there will be a moment later in life where someone will look back and say, this may have been the most important moment in Boeing's life.
So what advice do you give to your successor? What kind of person does that successor need to be? You just laid out what needs to happen. What kind of person is going to be delivering that kind of plan? What kind of person would you like to see? What kind of person needs to be in your chair to do what you've just described?
Again, I'll just start with the word transparency. You just can't blink for a minute. There are no
But is it
moments.
an external candidate? Is it an internal?
Yeah, no, guy. Well, I'm not going there. So we can go anywhere you want, but we're not going there. I will just tell you this: it'll be a deliberate process. It is.
Yep.
It has been thought through. They will get to a conclusion. It'll be a great one, and I'll be the most supportive player on the field.
But it's going to be an ongoing journey. This is not something that's going to be completed easily or quickly. What you've just described is something that happened over many years. How symmetrical?
It's been, again, you're getting way too into this one. This process and the thought process around what it takes and what it is, who it is. And remember, I'm 67 going on 68.
Yep.
This is not like we woke up and here, let's go do it. It's a methodical, it'll be well done, it'll be well articulated, and it'll be timely.
And Boeing will be a different company as a result of it? Or
it is. Yeah. It is a different company. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't go. Everything that we've put in place, our commitment to transparency, the extent to which we practiced it post-Alaska, the extent to which we practiced it post-Alaska, in full visibility to every interest that had been surrounding us for the last 5 years, made a difference. And it will continue to make a difference. And I believe anybody, and by the way, our board now is educated on what it means, anybody who comes into this role has to start with that thought process, that notion. And the rest of these initiatives and efforts, in my view, that'll be, the momentum's there, it'll continue. And if I always give somebody a warning sign, it's pace. It's the first question.
Take your time.
First question you ask me, when is it going to be done? Well, it's going to be done when it's going to be done. And be patient and keep the supply chain synchronized.
Are there metrics we should look out for? Are there metrics, milestones that we should think about?
We posted the metrics that we're looking at. So they're transparent for everybody, transparent for our regulator. So yes, and what those metrics are meant to represent in a factory is stability.
How important is Boeing to America?
I believe it's the most important company in the world, and I'm not objective. But here's the thing. Our mission is to protect, connect, and explore the world. Just think for a second about each of those, how important they are to the world, and particularly now. I loved Guillaume's answer to the question on, do we need 4 or 5 more competitors? We need 2 great ones. And yeah, there will be a third.
Do we have 2 great ones?
There will be a third.
Do we have 2 great ones now?
Of course we do. Of course we do.
Okay.
Of course we do. We take off and land every second of every day. Every second of every day. We deliver safe airplanes. This is, in my view, no question about that. But just stop for a minute. There's 2 guys that do this, connect. The protect, which nobody really talks about with respect to Boeing, and the work that we do for our US military, and now way more importantly as we move forward, the growing work we do for the allied forces around the world who are all contending with new threats. That's a whole new, it's not a whole new opportunity, but it is an opportunity that is getting all the emphasis that it could possibly be getting. And as long as we continue to develop products that are relevant to those new threats, we'll be in a great place.
In terms of, let's just circle back a little bit. Do we need is there an engineering quality that you need to run this company? Do you need to get your hands dirty and understand what is happening on the shop floor? Is that ultimately
if the answer, if you're directing that at me like every popular media
No, I'm not. I'm wondering what, really what I'm asking you is the successor question. Is this an engineering problem? Is this a talent problem? Is it a...
It's no one problem. The engineering talents in our company are enormous.
Yep.
I've been hanging around a lot of engineering companies and interests for a long time.
You have.
I've never seen one with more breadth and more skill in my life. It has to be organized. It has to be applied in a disciplined way. With respect to a successor, they're not going to engineer anything. If they engineer something, that's when we should all run for the hills.
Okay.
Right? So they have to be keenly aware of where the engineering expertise lies and to make sure it's supported in every way it can be. And that it gets the last vote on everything. And it gets the last vote on everything. So that's what you do. Manufacturing processes, do I have to assemble airplanes? Does my successor need to assemble airplanes? No. Does it need to know the factory's stable? Does it have to have the metrics in place that provide for that? Does it have to have the resident skills and proficiencies in place to make sure that's the case? The answer is yes. And there is all of that. It has to be organized. We got a wake-up call to do it even better, and that's what we do. We just focus on it and just do it.
Again, coming back to the point you raised about competition, this is a point of disruption, though, in the industry. I'd come back to the sustainability question. This is a point of disruption in the industry. If Boeing's looking that way, is it going to be distracted from the disruption that is taking place in this industry, potentially? Are you, by having to go through this process, leaving yourself open to the disruption we've seen in the EV sector? You've only got to look at what's happening here in Europe with the car industry. There are others that are interested in what you do and want to do it better.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, what we did, and of the things I'm very confident in, is what we did is we sustained all of the major technology research programs and development programs related to the technologies we think play on the next platform. All of these have to be developed, tested, matured before you can actually design an airplane that incorporates it.
Yep.
And that's a lesson all of us have learned who have ever developed an airplane. Make sure you take the time to mature those things. But I feel very good about the portfolio of capabilities that we will bring to that airplane. Very good about it. And again, you take the time to make sure they're mature and ready. And there will be some significant changes as we go forward. Yes, efficiency is the one that we all talk about, but I think autonomy is another one that everybody should talk more about. Doesn't mean pilotless. It just means autonomy capable.
Okay, let's just think about that for a moment. We're struggling to certify derivatives of current aircraft. What do you think the regulators are going to think about? how much of a lag is there going to be in new airplanes coming to market? When do you think you're going to be? This is the question that you're not going to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's assume that it's within the next 10 years. How long? Let's say it's 10 years from now.
Yep.
How long would it take to certify that airplane? And is that how much of a slowdown in the process is that going to mean?
Yeah, I can't predict that. I will say this: we are an applicant for an autonomous civil vehicle with our small air taxi called Whisk.
Yep.
We're an applicant, and that means that the regulator has accepted the application, and that means they're organizing themselves to certify autonomy and to develop an approach that they can codify. And it's one of the big reasons that we're invested in Whisk. It's one of the big reasons, and I have a lot of confidence that that airplane will not only hit the market, but it will be deemed safe, and it will demonstrate that.
You talked before about how important Boeing is to America and to the world, but let me ask you a question. We're going to have an election in November. What do you want to see from the next administration? What does Boeing want to see from the next administration?
Yeah, well, everybody knows, I think, we're a company that relies on trade. Free trade to us will always be sort of first on the list of desires. I'll be the first to acknowledge that that seems to be going in the wrong direction and has been for quite some time.
You worried?
Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried that the ramifications of isolation are going to, I don't want to overstate the word, but they're going to bring down economies. They just are. They just are. Now, I happen to be in an industry because choices are limited and because needs are great. It probably won't hit me first, but I worry about isolation with respect to the economic ramifications for lots of countries and lots of people. And isolation then breeds disenchantment, and disenchantment ultimately breeds political turnover. So that's the world I worry about with respect to isolation, and I don't like any of the signs I see.
Okay. How does that change the way you think about the way that Boeing's going to operate?
We're going to run hard, continue to build the world's best airplane, and then we're going to compete, and I'm going to lobby every day, all day for free trade.
Does it stop this? Does it stop the sustainability story? Does cooperation?
No.
I've heard building bridges a number of times today. What you're describing is not building bridges, it's blowing them up.
It's what I'm observing.
Yeah.
And I suspect you are too.
Yeah.
So we just have to be honest about what we observe. We have to express our concern for what may happen as a result. And those in industry, I think, have a pretty good picture on that. And then we have to lobby and convince the public and politicians that free trade's in everybody's best interest.
Is there a danger that the sustainability story ends up becoming? We went through the launch aid saga. We all remember that. Is there a danger that we end up balkanizing this process of sustainability, balkanizing the process of the next generation of airplanes, that there is no cooperation, and it becomes an effort that is driven by industrial policy with very domestic purposes in mind?
No, well, that's a description of an end game I have no interest in. I don't think it gets there. I really don't think it gets there. And it's with respect to this industry. This industry, we have allied nations supporting both supply sides. In my view, that will play well ultimately. We know we're going to have a competitor from China. We have a keen awareness for all of that. We should not be afraid of it. We should continue to develop technologies. I agree with Guillaume's comments completely. Just keep developing technologies the world needs and wants. Compete with the best of the best, in my case. That's Guillaume. He would probably say the same. We just keep trying to outdo each other, and that's where we keep running. I think a China competitor's got a long way to go on that front, measured in decades and decades, not in years.
How should government support Boeing and Airbus? How should government support the process of building the next generation of airplanes? How should government support the sustainability story that we're all hopefully on, the journey we're all on?
I think they have to mandate sustainability. I think we're all committed to it. So I'm not suggesting we need a slap in the face, but there are certain things that will have to happen policy-wise that create the absolute need and, more importantly, confidence that we are down that path.
Yep.
And that's all things sustainable fuel, all things sustainable aviation fuel. That's the answer that gets us even close to our objectives by 2050. So I'm in great favor of those kinds of policies, subject to the political side's understanding of what capabilities and timeframes are required to get there. And I believe we have tools across our industry. We have one we call Cascade, where you can do the math really easily, like in an hour, to figure out what policy objective will do to emissions in the next 20, 25 years. So, that's what we need to do. I don't think our industry needs financial help to develop airplanes.
Yep.
We all do fine. We have capital markets that want to support, and if anybody knows the extent to which capital markets want to step in and support our industry, it would be me, because we were in a desperate need at a desperate moment, and it came fast, and it came in a big way. So I don't think capital markets are a constraint for our industry by any stretch of the imagination. So I do think, though, on the subject of sustainability, intelligent policy will help to mandate the outcome.
You're going to Normandy in a few days' time. Is there a lesson in that? Is there something we should think about in that history? Europe and the United States? It feels like we're maybe growing apart rather than growing together. How do we think about that?
I probably would. Normandy has all kinds of meanings for me, mostly personal. My dad dropped in the 101st on the other side of the enemy line. And there's a lot of stories about how it happened, all that. My point in saying that is that story, it captures you like you can't believe. Feel like you're watching a movie. But I've never seen anything that reminded me in my time of that, what would have been that moment for him, until I saw the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That all of a sudden looked to me like, wow, that might have been a moment he went through. So for me, I want to see NATO. I want to see the support for NATO grow. I want to see the understanding of what the ramifications of a weak NATO would mean. And I never want to see a war. So I'm going to Normandy for lots of personal reasons. But I think we're in a moment. I just do. And if we don't know it, we ought to get real about it. And I think we ought to support every element of NATO, every element of NATO. I was in Poland, of course, was on the front line yesterday, all day. This is what we talk about. I've had good discussions here. We just have to understand the threat. It's real, and I think I saw a glimpse of what all of the protectors of France in this case and in Normandy faced.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Calhoun.
Thank you.
In Berlin, Dave Calhoun, outgoing Chief Executive Officer of Boeing there with Guy Johnson, really traipsing around the heated debate across America, the engineering integrity of Boeing, those accidents that you're acutely aware of, and the fears that are out there. And the thing I've been monitoring, Damian Sassower with me this morning. Yeah. Damian, quickly here, what I've been monitoring is when do we start buying Airbus? It's just as simple as that. When does Southwest Airlines start buying Airbus?
Look, I'm not an aerospace analyst, so I can't really read through some of those statements and see what that's going to do to the stock price. But there seems to be a little bit of air there.
Damian Sassower with us, Paul Sweeney in transit on the Gulfstream with Alex Steele to Nashville. A data check is in order. Futures improved, -25 to -17. The VIX not out to 14, 13.73. Yields are lower. From New York City, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, Damian Sassower, and Tom Keene, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. Lisa Mateo chose to be in today, and Michael Barr. It's a good and beautiful Tuesday. We welcome all of you here in this hour. Raghuram Rajan will join us from the Booth School, Chicago. He is my definitive interview on India. We are thrilled that Professor Rajan could join us, the former head of the Indian Central Bank, out with a new book on the future for India and Modi. This is tumultuous. It's Damian's wheelhouse. We'll get to that in a moment. We're on Android. We're on Apple CarPlay. Download the Bloomberg Business app. It's a new distribution. Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Good morning, the old distribution. And thank you for listening on conventional radio. But also on Apple CarPlay. That's good. On YouTube, search for Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Thank you for being out there. I'll get in a live chat here once we get to Lisa with a extended market check as well. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by Cohn-Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Cohn-Resnick can help you improve business resilience through a comprehensive risk management solution. Visit cohnresnick.com. And we thank Cohn-Resnick for their commitment to what we do in economics, finance, investment, and derivatives I don't understand with Damian Sassower. What are the Indian markets doing? It's just like uncertainty clicked in, right?
I'm looking right now. Financials are down 7%. Industrials down 15%. So this Tata, it's a lot of other Adani.
Is it a big market like to somebody at Fidelity or PIMCO?
And it's an overvalued market. And again, this speaks to the ease with which, or the lack thereof, that you can move capital into India and put it to work effectively. So, to get into that equity market, to put money to work, there's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, a lot of constraints placed on foreigners. And I think that kind of locks you in there for a longer period than you might otherwise want.
Thank you out on YouTube for your comments on Professor Rajan joining us in this hour. We agree. A timely interview. Probably our whole single best idea today will be focused on that. With a Bloomberg Business Brief, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Futures, they are lower, and this is after Wall Street started the new month with a mixed session. Right now we have S&P futures, Dow futures down 0.3%, NASDAQ futures down 0.2%. The 2-year yield at 4.79%, down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.37%, and that's down 1 basis point. Indian stocks, you talked about it, posted the biggest loss in 4 years in its tight election. Adani Group linked companies plunged, the rupee has slumped, and elections in Mexico, that pushed the peso lower for a second day. Right now, we'll head over to Bitcoin. It's lower at 68,995. The GameStop craze, well, that's taken a little bit of a break. Keith Gill, a.k.a. Roaring Kitty, said he had accumulated a stake in the company. Shares are down more than 2% right now after jumping 21% yesterday. And then you have Berkshire Hathaway shares up about 0.5% after the New York Stock Exchange said it's going to cancel its bad trades. And that was after that software glitch that sparked trading halts, falsely displayed 99% drops in companies, including Berkshire. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Back on to what we're going to see Friday in the jobs report. Clearly, very, very important. Dana Peterson joining us now, chief economist of the Conference Board. And what's important here is the heritage of the Conference Board and really drilling into what we see across America. Dana, is this the month where the job market breaks to something weaker?
I think it might be. I mean, we already saw a cooling in the prior report. And really those big industries that had been contributing most of the gains really pulled back in the prior month. So I think we may see more of that this Friday.
Okay, we may see more of that, but it comes out into two surveys, the establishment survey and the larger employment survey. What metric are you looking at to see some form of legitimate slowdown in job formation?
Well, definitely payrolls. And it's really that other set, away from healthcare and social services and government and leisure and hospitality kind of fell out of the mix. So if they stay out, then it's really just up to healthcare and everything else. And so if you don't see much job gains everywhere else, then you're probably going to see another really weak print.
Good morning, Dana. So we know that services are driving most of the inflation gains here in the U.S. Just how important is tomorrow's ISM services print to you?
Well, it's going to be very important because it will give us a glimpse of what's going on, not only in the services economy, but also for payrolls heading into the employment report. But again, services, as you said, are a big issue when it comes to inflation. A big chunk of it is shelter costs, which are slowing year on year, but it's probably going to take until the end of this year before we see a bottom. Meanwhile, wages are still very elevated amongst a number of services, especially those services where people have to physically show up to work. Companies are holding on to them, bidding up wages, and that's influencing inflation.
So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about what the markets are pricing in. I mean, they had been pricing in no move by the Fed in July. Now I'm looking at the print here. It looks like something on the order of 16%. We have guys like Steve Englander on the tape talking about the potential for a Fed cut as early as July. What do you think?
I'm not sure that's going to happen. Yes, the economy is slowing, especially consumer spending. That's good news. The labor market is still pretty robust, even with smaller payroll gains. Most people are working, but inflation is still uncomfortably above the 2% target. Even the PCE readings we got last week, yes, month on month, slowed, but the year on year was barely unchanged. And so we think that the Fed is going to continue to need more information and data and confidence that inflation is going to slow.
You know, let's agree, Dana, and I think we can, that by any sense of history, central banks are after the fact. How many monthly job reports do they need after the fact to act? Is it a 3-month moving average of miserableness? Or can they like see something on Friday and say, okay, June whatever, we're going to do something?
I don't think it's about payrolls or even the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate's super low. Yeah. And we know that companies are not letting people go. Tom. It's all about inflation, I think.
So let's talk about the next Fed meeting, June 12th. It's a week away. It's a SEP meeting, the dots. Talk to us about summary of economic projection. What do you expect to come out of that? What do you expect about the 2025 dot?
Well, I think the 2025 dot is probably going to be higher than it was before. We're expecting that core inflation and also headline inflation won't get back to 2% probably until the middle of 2025. So that means fewer interest rate cuts. And also, we still have been talking about upward pressures on inflation that are not going to go away. The Fed's going to have to still resist that. So we think that interest rates are definitely going to be higher for longer.
I'm glad, Damian, you brought this up because I avoid it like the plague. The dots.
Got to talk about the dots. Well, there's going to be a right sizing. There's going to be a right sizing of inflation expectations from the FOMC. That's going to happen. So, like maybe
the dots lift?
They should go up. I think 2024, it's just going to take one vote to bring that dot higher, that median dot. But it's 2025.
Do you buy that the dots are going to lift?
I think they might. Certainly when we look at all the pressures that we're seeing on inflation.
And all the comments we're hearing out of the Fed. You know, Dana, I'm going to take you out of your wheelhouse a little bit. We have another central bank meeting this week, Canada. And Canada has proven to be a central bank that doesn't necessarily have to move in lockstep with the Fed. Yeah. What do you think about what's going on in Canada? You think they can cut this week?
Well, their inflation picture and also their labor market and growth picture is very different from the U.S. So it is highly probable that they can go. These are two separate economies, very different drivers going on.
Tom, the markets are now pricing an 80% probability that Canada is going to move. It was not that way just a few days ago, I got to say.
Right. December 13th, 2023. West Texas was under $70 a barrel.
Yep.
We're getting back there. Dana, can oil deflate and assist the Fed in their challenge?
Well, I think it's going to be the opposite. We just heard that OPEC is going to be cutting even more. That's going to keep a kind of a floor on energy prices. Gasoline prices are going to go up this summer. It's certainly going to be a lot of demand. And so I don't really see much relief from energy in inflation prints.
Okay, Dana, thank you so much. Very valuable. Dana Peterson with us with the conference board this morning. Futures negative 25, Dow futures negative 149. The VIX reaches out near 14, 13.85. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Damian, Lisa, India has been counting more than 640 million votes cast over the past 6 weeks in the world's largest democratic exercise, which was widely expected to give Prime Minister Narendra Modi a third 5-year term, but it turns out to be much closer than predicted. Bloomberg's breaking news editor in Asia, Derek Walbank.
We're in a situation where all of the exit polls over the weekend were projecting a pretty substantial landslide win for Narendra Modi. That really has not held true. I mean, he looks like his overall alliance is on track for a win, but his specific party might actually have to rely on allies to make up that majority. And that is very much not the position that he thought that he would be in.
Bloomberg's Derek Allbank spoke to Surveillance not too long ago. Later today, President Biden plans to sign an executive order that would effectively prevent new asylum claims until migrant crossings drop by about 2/3 from where they are right now. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre spoke to reporters aboard Air Force One last night.
We are constantly and will continuously look at all options to try and really deal with the immigration system, a system that's been broken for decades.
As of last April, border agents encountered about 4,300 undocumented migrants per day. The jury has been seated in Hunter Biden's federal firearms case. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports.
12 panelists and 4 alternates were all chosen after just one day of jury selection. The president's son has been charged with lying on federal gun purchase forms when he said he was not a drug addict. He's pleaded not guilty, and he's arguing he's being unfairly targeted by the Justice Department. Prospective jurors were asked about their knowledge of the case, their thoughts about gun ownership, and whether they or anyone close to them have struggled with substance abuse or addiction or ever owned a gun. Opening statements are set to begin today. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Derek Wallbank in New Delhi, and Damian, this underscores the phrase of the summer, which is excessive heat. It may be Canada and worries about fires and smoke coming back down to America again. It may be his New Delhi moving up again to 114 degrees over the weekend and into next week.
School closures.
Phnom Penh in Cambodia, 94 degrees, again an excessive heat warning going up near 100 degrees. This will be in the Wednesday morning. Is well, this won't go away. This overlays all of your work within emerging markets, doesn't it?
We were just talking about the more people have died of heat in Thailand this year so far than they did in all of 2023, and that's just endemic of what you're seeing in places like the Philippines, in Manila. I mean, school closures in Delhi. I mean, everywhere. So, yeah, no, this definitely plays into the economy, Tom.
And basically, Miami, we make jokes about it, but I'm sorry, this isn't funny. Even within the air conditioning and prosperity, I think of agricultural Florida as well. Again, there's that phrase, excessive heat, and basically it's July in Miami in the 1st of June.
Well, it's all those data centers. They have to keep cool, right? Amazon, Google. I mean, it's going to get really hot, and you just got to turn up the air conditioning, crank it up, and make sure that we can get our get our stuff on that we're shopping for online on time.
But in your world, how does a lack of air conditioning fold in?
Well, I mean, I really don't even think we can quantify.
Coffee, Vietnam.
Well, if you could talk about commodities and you could talk about terms of trade and the weather impact on that, that's obvious. But I don't think we can really yet even synthesize what this means to households in some of these economies in some of these countries, and especially in lieu of some of the weather-related events, the catastrophes we've seen in that area of the world in just the last year. So it's just going to be, it could be devastating.
Yeah, and again, Iloilo and Manila in the Philippines, again, that phrase, excessive heats, not like in Delhi, they get up into the 90s, but again, a huge body of the population removed from the luxury of air conditioning. It's a story Bloomberg News will be following worldwide. Futures at -21, Dow futures -122. 10-year real yield, haven't quoted it in with a vengeance, but within range, 2.05%. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a lower open. We have NASDAQ down and S&P futures all down 0.3%. We have the 2-year yield 4.79%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.36%, down 2 basis points. A few labor market prints, they're going to be unveiled this week. First up, we have the monthly JOLTS data that's out today at 10 a.m. Wall Street time. Tomorrow, we move on to ADP's private employment report. That's followed by weekly jobless claims on Thursday, and then, yes, May payrolls on Friday. Let's go to Intel shares. They're higher this morning, up more than 1%. CEO Pat Gelsinger, well, he talked about new products at a trade show in Taiwan, and he also fired back at NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang's claim that traditional processors like Intel's, well, they're running out of steam. NVIDIA is down about 0.1%. Apple shares lower, down 0.2%. The shares actually rose nearly 1% in yesterday's trading. That was enough to put the stock back in positive territory for the year. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. Good morning, everyone. And Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers. They charge dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83% rates, subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. Joining us in New Delhi now, before we speak with Professor Rajan of the Booth School, the former head of the Indian Central Bank, Derek Wallbank, joins us this morning. Derek, in our last hour, we really talked about the nuances of the election and Modi. I want to bring it over to the intelligentsia of India and to people like Raghuram Rajan, who is arguably the most iconic economist and political economy thinker in all of India. They are the elite. Where do the elite like Raghuram Rajan fit in to the next Modi government?
Well, it's an interesting question, Tom, and I think one of the questions that we're having right now is how will that government form, and what prices will be necessary for that government to form, and who's going to be there. I think that's a really live ball question. I'm not sure that we particularly have the answer to the structure of how this would go. It's one of those things where if you win in a walk, you can put in whoever you want. If you don't win in a walk and you actually need allies help, as our current top headline says, then you have to get their buy-in for whatever you want to do. So it's very much a live ball question.
Does Satya Nadella of Microsoft or Raghuram Rajan of the Booth School Chicago, do they have a voice in Indian domestic politics?
I think that they are people who are looked up to in a lot of ways. I mean, I think there's an enormous amount of pride when you talk about someone like Satya Nadella, and he's somebody who people want to be seen with. You see this when he comes back, the crowds that he's able to draw in, this sort of I wouldn't say veneration, but something maybe 2 steps down from that word, where people, as I say, people really do look up to him. He's a success story. I think that their views are very important. I think one of the things that we see here a lot is there's this real fascination and attention to how India is doing in the world, and this sort of like India on the make, right? And that story is really big. Also a sort of like India v. China, how it's doing comparatively. Yeah. But the idea of India taking its place on the world stage, I think that's a really big story. And I think that's something people pay a lot of attention to.
That perfectly measures it, Damian Sassower, the idea of India on the make globally. I don't think China's visualized right now as on the make globally. I think it's a real distinction.
Well, Tom, you mentioned Satya Nadella. You mentioned Professor Rajan. I'm going to shift gears on you. I'm going to talk about the $860 billion of workers' remittances that flow into, emerging markets and other countries over the course of last year alone. India was 15% of that equation. They are the largest recipient of migrant inflows. We did a lot of work on this on my team, Emerging Market Fixed Income here at Bloomberg Intelligence. Derek, I need to ask you, what does this election mean for workers' remittances? It's a stable source of revenue for India. Do you foresee that continuing to grow, their share of global remittances continuing to grow, specifically, as Tom points out, at the expense of China?
It's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure that I have a specific take on it. But what I do have a specific look at is if I'm sort of thinking of the map of India in terms of an income kind of situation, one of the things I'm looking at the map right here is that when you come out into sort of the more rural areas that are sort of less developed, you did see a little bit more of a place where opposition candidates were able to find footing. And so that's, I think, one of the things that we're going to have to unpack a little bit, because when if I look at a place like Maharashtra, right, the state of Mumbai, in and around Mumbai, it sort of looks a little bit like it did in 2019. But when you sort of come well out, there's a lot of stuff that was orange on the map that's now blue.
Well, Derek, let's dovetail here off Damian's brilliant question on remittances. And the answer is, in what you know so well as Singapore, the Ceylonese of Singapore, which is, again, those southern Indians that, is a generalization, don't support President Modi. What is the relationship of the Indian diaspora in Singapore with Modi in northern India?
Oh, boy. I would hesitate to put everybody into a same, sort of camp.
We do that on surveillance, Derek.
Derek, we're tossing softballs here on a Monday morning to you. Sorry about these.
Well, no, I think it's I think one of the things that I would say is that I think one of the big changes this election versus last election, the last couple elections, is how much this story is beyond the attention of just the diaspora. And I think that's one of the things that I take away from this is that the diasporic populations are always interested, always want to know what's going back on. I would say that for myself, looking back at the US or the UK, like I'm always tremendously interested, but this is a story that has now gotten beyond that, right? You don't sit there and look at 5-6 red headlines on the Bloomberg terminal for an election like this just because people who have a personal connection to India are interested in the story. This is something that is now, it is not a regional market. It is a super regional market, at least on way to getting to be a global market where everyone, I think it is hard to go about and do your job now if you're working in finance without actually knowing something about India, like knowing enough to be dangerous. I think that it is no longer a story you can leave to other people in order to be like a conversant human being on world markets. And I think that is a major sea change, and it's only going to continue to be that regardless of the results of this election.
Derek, thank you so much. Derek Wallbank getting us ready for a conversation with Professor Rajan. We'll give you that in the vicinity of 20 minutes as well. Derek Wallbank in New Delhi. I want to bring it back to America, Damian, and the elephant in the room, and I don't think I was there 6 months ago or a year ago, was, again, even on the other side of the far side of the world, as Patrick O'Brien would say, the answer is American exceptionalism colors every discussion we have about the Damian Sassower world.
And even those in India, $4 trillion economy, that's in U.S. dollars, Tom, of which remittances, we point out, are 3.5% of that. That's a lot of money that's flowing back into a country like India, the size of India. And remember, this is an economy that by 2029, the IMF expects it to grow to $6.4 trillion. That's a pretty big, that's a lot of growth there, Tom. It's a lot to unpack.
And the heated research note, and also within the wonderful Bloomberg opinion piece I just put out on Twitter and LinkedIn, is the experts here, folks, take real issue in a direct compare and contrast of India and China. That's what the amateurs like me do.
Right.
And the answer is it's way more subtle than that.
Well, the comparison is made from an investor standpoint, right? It's made from the perspective that CGBs and IGBs, that's China government bonds and Indian government bonds, have historically not been investable. And now those markets have opened up to foreign investors and they have become investable. What's different about them, though, very different, China has low yields and India has high yields.
India has high yields. Do you buy the dip here? I know it's not what you do,
no, you got to look at the price of oil.
Thinking.
So if you look at the correlation between the Indian 10-year and the price of Brent crude, it's as tight as you're going to find in any macro variable. And really absolutely, I'll run the chart for you right now. And so we have to look at the price of oil before we know where Indian bonds are going.
Lisa, Damian's starting to run charts here on a Tuesday morning.
It's too early.
It's too early.
Not too early. Never too early.
West Texas Intermediate 72.90 down $1.31. Are we going to see a 69 handle on an American barrel? Please stay with us on YouTube. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures. We're pointing to a lower open. We have NASDAQ down, S&P futures all down about 0.3%. We'll take you over to the bond market. The 2-year yield, 4.78%. That's down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield, 4.36%, and that's down 2 basis points. Want to take you over to commodities. We have spot gold lower, $2,333 an ounce. And over on the YouTube chat, a lot of talk about oil, so let's get right to it. We have Brent crude at $77 a barrel. WTI crude, look at this, at $72 a barrel. To earnings we go. Bath & Body Works down 5%. The company reported adjusted earnings per share for the first quarter, beat estimates. But here's the thing, its second quarter outlook, that showed demand still uncertain.
Bath & Body Works.
And then we go to Target, down 0.5%. It's among the names removed from Goldman's conviction list. And finally, some big airplane moves. Sources say Airbus negotiating a major sale, more than 100 aircraft to China. Airbus ADRs down 0.2%. And then Turkish Airlines looking to buy 250 jets from Boeing. Boeing up 0.2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
Thank you to Guy Johnson for a conversation with David Calhoun there. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. 8:30, massive economic data. Well, that's coming up Thursday and Friday as well. But at 10 a.m. this morning, Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney from Nashville will have a substantial set of economic data at 10 o'clock. And our economic indicators always brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth. Go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. We thank Commonwealth for their real commitment to what we're doing here as well. Joining us for a peaceful conversation, Damian, the day is
interview of the day.
Well, I don't know about the interview of the day, but let's get back to sanity and what the markets are doing. Lindsay Rosner with us, multi-sector investing, Goldman Sachs Asset Management. Which category of multi-sector is your most vibrant study right now?
The most vibrant study would be structured product. What's interesting about it isn't a market that you can just buy it all. This is a market that you absolutely have to be an active manager in. But we find that there are great opportunities still in CLOs and even in commercial mortgage-backed securities.
For the mere mortals out there, identify what structured product is. It sounds like I'm buying skyscrapers that are bankrupt. What's structured product?
Hopefully not skyscrapers that are bankrupt. Although there was actually you could say a default in office space in New York recently. But really what structured product is a bucket of assets. And there is a structured overlaid that allows you to have tranching, so splitting of the stuff, exactly. And different levels of it have different protection levels, or what they call fancy jargon credit enhancement. So if you're at the highest part of the capital structure, you're going to have the most credit enhancement. That comes typically with less yield, less spreads.
New York Yankees are
Hey, I'm a Phillies girl, but I'll let you go with the analogy.
That's fine. The Chicago White Sox are the lowest tranche.
Lindsay, how would you respond to the argument? I mean, we all know about the $1.7 trillion private credit market, and we know about, the marketing that goes around that these are, they have tighter covenants, they're safer. Talk to us about the recoveries on first lien loans. I'm hearing that recoveries on a lot of that debt are not going to be as high as what you might otherwise find in the public markets.
Yeah, so it is really going to be collateral specific, but it goes back to, again, where I started with active management. You want a manager who is really thinking about what they're investing in. And so you can look at broad numbers like what are recovery rates? Are they going to be lower? I would say find your manager.
Right.
Find your manager who's going to do the right job. And again, the big thing that's different between public credit and private credit is that private credit is less liquid. And what I mean by that, your ability to get your money every single day, less so. In the public markets, we have daily liquidity. With that, you get a premium, by the way, though, in the private market to compensate you for that.
Lindsay, I want to channel one of your former colleagues, a chap by the name of Sam Finkelstein. Now at Citadel, I believe, a senior PM at Citadel. He joined Griffin down in Miami. A former emerging market portfolio manager. Talk to us about the role of emerging markets in a multi-asset, diversified portfolio.
Yeah, so you want to be able to look across the globe into all asset classes for opportunity. As you're both aware, it is a great opportunity set right now from a yield perspective. We've got yields that we haven't seen. There's income in fixed income. We've heard that story. But you really want to go out there and find the right place to get risk-adjusted returns because spreads are really tight. Emerging markets have been definitely an outperformer year to date. What's really driven that is that the double B and single B market has been open for financing, which is new. But we think about emerging markets as a piece of the puzzle. And there is a lot of high risk, a lot of election risk. I mean, certainly we've got election risk in the U.S. We don't have to get into that. But there are election risk in emerging markets as well. We are finding more opportunity actually in the U.S. right now, and our portfolios are tilted more to the U.S. in a multi-sector framework.
So, Lindsay, I'd love to ask you about the U.S. elections, but we only have you for a limited amount of time.
Good,
and I
great.
need to channel Cliff Asness here. Your GSAM factor indices, we talk about carry, we talk about value, quality. What factors do you believe as an investor you should be leaning into in the current environment?
Yeah, it would be idiosyncratic factors. You want to do the right work here. If you think about it.
She got that from a Goldman Sachs.
She's been reading my research, Tom.
You know, it's
idiosyncratic carry, Tom.
An
idiosyncratic factor is the kids are out of school and it's killing my bank account. Go. What do you got?
Tom, it means you got to do the homework, right? You got to figure out, is this a company that's going to pay you back? And that's really the point with bonds. Are you going to get paid back?
I'm kidding, but Damian asked a really important question, folks, because the factors shift and adjust and the weighting shift. I want to go back to one of your observations, which was what's called the Money Tower, the Mutual of New York Tower on Broadway at 55 and 60. Now, you know, the Pinatas, Blackstone, they paid $1,000 a square foot or whatever. 10 years ago, it was a different mood, and we see all these haircuts going on now. Come on, that's got to be an opportunity for you or Goldman Sachs advising big foreign money. When does the big foreign money show up to buying train wrecks like the Money Tower on 1740 Broadway?
When they can make money on the investment.
Is that now?
Well, it depends based on the forward when you think about who are the tenants, what's the leasing opportunities, just like you think about a normal corporate company. You know, what's the forward? What's their growth opportunity? Is this an exciting place to be? What's the quality of the space that you're dealing with? If we think that it makes sense and we think that the price is right, then we can advise and help. But I think the big thing right now is that there are a lot of assets trading at the wrong price. And so if you just passively buy the world right now, you're going to get burned. You need to have an active manager to help you sort through.
Within the fancy talk world of Damian Sassower and Lindsay Rosner, the answer is you're waiting for price rationalization to occur.
That's right. Back to spreads being really tight, we're waiting for the right time to get involved. That doesn't mean we have no risk in our portfolios.
Well, you got to keep busy. You know, you got to keep working a 10-hour work day.
There is some carry. I think what's also really interesting are their rel-val opportunities. And I'm going to give you one that's not necessarily in my bond portfolio. But right now, you can go to France and see Taylor Swift for $200, where prices start in the U.S. $2,000 plus. Global market. Vote with your feet. Find the opportunities.
Did you see Taylor Swift in Paris?
You know what? My sister did. And I'm not going to blame her for not taking me. We have a phenomenal relationship. She went with a bunch of friends. They had a great time.
Lindsay and I were thinking about going down to Argentina.
So let's go. We got Mohammed Al-Arian.
Yeah.
He may have seen Taylor Swift. Muhammad may have.
Riley from St. Louis went, and Lindsay Rosner's sister went. Was everybody in the audience American in Paris? I mean, that's what it felt like.
There were many Americans there seeing
Any
Taylor.
other guests? Email in on YouTube live chat, please. Did you go see Taylor in Paris? Damian, save us with one more question.
Lindsay, you know, you mentioned some of these less liquid segments of the fixed income market is offering value. And, you know, when I think of those areas of the market, and obviously for you guys at GSAM, you know these markets, you know who holds the bonds, you know, but I get a little bit fearful because for me, the whole private credit, you know, these little clubs, these little syndicates, and then you hear what's going on with Vista, and they're kind of, you know, fighting with each other because, again, everybody knows who owns the bonds, and you can kind of show preference for one club at the expense of another. So talk to us about those dynamics and how that changes the playing field for you as an investor.
Yeah, the dynamics are the same ones that have always been of portfolio construction. It's all about sizing, and it's about understanding your liquidity profile. And while, yes, private credit has grown, this concept of figuring that out and how to get out on the right spot on the efficient frontier isn't anything new.
thank you for joining. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Told you, conversation today. Told you.
Multi-sector investing barely describes its nuances of piecing together where we are right now, particularly within commercial real estate. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, Lisa. India has been counting more than 640 million votes cast over the past 6 weeks in the world's largest democratic exercise, which was widely expected to give Prime Minister Narendra Modi a third 5-year term. However, the apparent margin of victory is much narrower than believed. The vote count will continue throughout the day. President Biden plans to take on the migrant surge at the U.S.-Mexico border with an executive order he plans to sign today. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider has more from Washington.
A lot of what is in this order was a bipartisan bill that the Senate passed that would have given the president similar powers, but was blocked by Republicans at Donald Trump's behest earlier this year. So now President Biden has decided to kind of do this on his own, if you will, and it would halt certain asylum claims at the border until crossings fall dramatically.
By about 2/3 from current levels, according to Bloomberg's Jody Schneider. Renewed concerns about crackdowns on protesters in Chinese-controlled Hong Kong as the world marks 35 years since the massacre in Tiananmen Square in the center of Beijing. Hong Kong's leader, John Lee, citing the national security law imposed by China in 2020 ahead of any possible vigils commemorating the Tiananmen Square anniversary.
The government position on public events is very clear. All activities by any person must be conducted according to the law.
Annual vigils in Hong Kong used to draw thousands of people each June 4th to remember the Tiananmen Square deadly crackdown. Donald Trump's name will appear on the ballot today for the first time since his historic conviction on felony crimes as a handful of states to hold the last presidential Republican primary contests of 2024. The former president will be on the ballot in New Jersey, Montana, and New Mexico. President Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, will compete in primaries in the same states, plus the primary in Washington, D.C. and in South Dakota. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Thanks so much. I think Michael Barr, thanks so much. Damian, I think we've got to get out the importance of this conversation. Folks, in a few minutes, we are going to speak with Raghuram Rajan of the Booth School Chicago, the former head of the Indian Central Bank. And what's so timely, as usual, Damian, Raghu is way out front with a book that is pending, and I'm so honored to have a PDF of this book that's not out yet, Breaking the Mold. And it is Rajan on India. This is going to be a fascinating conversation, Dave.
Well, I definitely want to ask him about migrant inflows. I mean, it is such a stable source of revenue, and it's helped that country grow, and really kind of, it's really what it's done. It's
the remittances.
It's helped the FX. It's helped keep the cross rate stable, and that's very similar. Right. You make comparisons to China, it's very similar to what we see between dollar yuan and dollar rupee.
For all of you worldwide, this conversation with a professor from Booth School Chicago is so timely. We could go 8, 9, 10 ways with Professor Rajan, but we will focus on his India, given this historic election today. Really something, and I'm sorry, I alluded to what we saw in the midterms in the U.S., where there's sort of a certitude set up, and then it's oops. And again, Derek Wallbank saying we don't know the oops yet. We don't know the details yet.
Well, I'm getting investors, emerging market practitioners that are emailing me, texting out, asking me what is the spillover from what's happening in India and Mexico. And I have to say, that's house money. If you were invested in India and Mexico the last 3 years since the pandemic, I mean, those are some of the few countries where on the currency side, on the spot FX side, you probably made a bit of money.
Well, we'll have to see on this. Again, we welcome you on Apple CarPlay and Android. It's free. It's a Bloomberg Business app. Look for that out on Apple CarPlay, smarter and better. And on YouTube, thank you so much for the YouTube live chat. Always informative. Search Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast out there. And I'll make clear with the podcast I'm doing, Single Best Idea today, we'll focus totally on the gentleman from Booth School, Chicago. Futures at -19 from New York City. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have NASDAQ and S&P futures down about 0.2% as well as Dow futures. The two-year yield 4.79%, down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.36%. That's down 2 basis points. Over to commodities. We have spot gold lower at $2,333 an ounce. Brent crude $77 a barrel. We have WTI crude $73 a barrel. What's moving the markets? It's Bitcoin miner Core Scientific. They're up 37%. It signed a 12-year contract with AI startup CoreWeave. Then you have application software company GitLab down 1%. First quarter results beat expectations, has raised this full year guidance, but here's the thing, its revenue forecast for the second quarter came in weaker than anticipated. And here's a grim statistic. A new poll shows almost 2/3 of Americans considered middle class feel they're facing economic hardship and they don't anticipate a change for the rest of their lives. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thank you so much. We welcome all of you across America and around the world, and particularly all of you listening in India now, to, without question, our Bloomberg Conversation of the Day on the historic moment for the Indian people. Raghuram Rajan is at Booth School. He's a Miller professor at Booth School. His financial book on the crisis of 07-08 won every award, Fault Lines. He is one of our great financial professors and, of course, a former head of a central bank of India. Far more importantly, as always, Rajan out front, he has a book he is delivering, Breaking the Mold, on his India. It will be a definitive 270 pages. Look for that from Princeton University Press shortly. Raghu, thank you so much for sending me the PDF of the book. I'm going to cut to the chase, Professor. The final sentence of your book, they cannot have any more excuses. What are the excuses Modi has now, and what does he need to move India to a new prosperity?
Well, we have an election. The results have been coming out, and I think it's a splendid result because it tells the government it needs to change course. The old course was unviable, and we can talk about that. Of course, markets seem to be disappointed. We can talk about that also, why markets are reacting negatively. But I think what is happening today is really, in the long run, really good for India because it forces India to choose a different course from the one it has been on, a course which has led to much wider unemployment and distress than needed in the country.
Is this an election result that you see will bring the technocratic and elite South together with a more emotional and historic North? Does it bring the polarity of India together, or do we have a more separate India in 2026?
No, it's actually a win for democracy, and that's good for India because what democracy does is it allows the different paths to essentially express themselves and to negotiate. The problem earlier was India was trending towards a more autocratic country, a country with one leader who had a larger than life image. And that unfortunately meant that the BJP leadership wasn't listening to the economic news on the ground that people were actually suffering hardship, wasn't listening to the broader sense that the weaponization of various instruments of the government to put opposition party leaders in jail was simply not gelling. And it would have taken India down a course which was ruinous in the longer run, maybe in the short run beneficial to the big business groups. And that's why the market is reacting adversely. But I think this is good.
Raghuram Rajan with us with Booth School Chicago. We welcome all of you on YouTube worldwide and particularly in South Asia. My colleague Damian Sassower to Professor Rajan.
Professor Rajan, you have mentioned the concept of an authoritarian democracy and how India is moving into that sort of bucket. Talk to us a little bit about what this election means for India and what it means for Narendra Modi and some of his policies on labor and whatnot.
So I think the key number to look at in this election is the BJP's own seats in parliament. They almost surely will fall short of a majority. which means that they have to actually take the support of other parties, convince them to stay on board, which means they have to be much more sensitive to a broad-based set of policies. Now, the BJP has done some very good things during its stint in power. For example, it has improved the investment in infrastructure. And you can see roads, airports, highways becoming much better in India. That's good. However, what it has not articulated is a sensible policy for broad-based employment. And that almost surely requires policies on human capital, how to skill up the workforce, how to bring industry together with universities and so on to get people jobs. So the frustration with the BJP has been mass unemployment, which is, in an authoritarian regime, they simply don't even acknowledge the fact that unemployment has been growing and is especially amongst the youth. So what this election has done is essentially given them a cold shower of reality, that people are not happy with your policies. And that will force, if the BJP does come back to power after negotiating with allies, it will force policies which are broader, more inclusive, and more sensitive to the needs of the people. That's a good thing.
This morning, an extended interview with Raghuram Rajan of the Booth School, Chicago. For those joining in America, a shock result, or beginning of results, I should say, in a Delhi election assumed to be dominant for Mr. Modi, and it was decidedly less so. My colleague, Damian Sassower.
Professor Rajan, I want to take you back to your former role as Director of Research at the IMF. You're familiar with workers' remittances, the role they play in India. I mean, the role they play globally, 860 million of remittances in 2023. India is 15% of that. Talk to us about what this election means for the diaspora outside of India, about the flows of capital into India. Is this going to change things at all?
Well, I think it can actually be good news, both from the perspective, remittances will continue regardless of who's in power. This is more, a lot of money coming from the Middle East, some from the United States and Europe, for people to their families. And that will continue. There's no reason why that would be disrupted. What is interesting, however, is foreign direct investment has been slowing into India over the last couple of years. Some people argue that one of the reasons it has been slowing is that people are worried about arbitrary government policy, to the extent that a more democratic dispensation at the center creates more stability about government policies. Especially, it limits the weaponization of the tax authorities, of the investigative authorities. Business actually will feel more comfortable. I hope, and I think it is quite possible that private investment, which has also been on the down, as well as foreign direct investment, could pick up slowly as it sees policies emerge, which are more comforting.
Professor, within your new book, Breaking the Mold, and I guess the answer is for every central bank, the raging vogue now is to pull climate change into some form of monetary policy mandate from whatever the nation is. Climate change is reality in India. New Delhi today, I believe, a high of 111, 114 Fahrenheit. Who's counting? Professor, what does India do and what does Modi do to immediately break the mold on a climate change out of control?
Well, this is precisely what the book is about. Can India afford to become another China? Does the world have room for another China becoming a manufacturing giant? And that was the direction the Modi government was trying to go in, offering massive subsidies to capital-intensive manufacturing. And the reality is that China is already there. There is very little place for another manufacturing giant, especially given the protectionism that's rife in the world. But India has a card up its sleeve. It actually is doing far better in services exports, which is much greener, much more sustainable. And you're seeing a huge growth in skilled services exported to the rest of the world, whether it's telemedicine, consulting, chip design, lots of new areas opening up. India accounts for 5% of global trade there. That's good.
How do you unify a nation with over 20 languages? We in the United States are in a panic. I mean, there's two languages in Chicago, the Cubs and the White Sox. That's a different story. But Raghu, how do you unify towards a new India around 20 disparate languages?
Tom, it's more than that. It's 20 official languages, which means they have enough people speaking it. But there are 600 additional dialects and languages. It's a vast, complicated country. And the only way it's unified is through democracy, because democracy allows each community a voice. You talked about 2026 in India. That's when the parliamentary seats get reapportioned, when there will be a move to have new seats in parliament for the more populous areas. That has to be done by consensus. And what I'm so glad about is that it will be done by consensus, because democracy has reestablished itself in India, and they will have to negotiate how that reapportionment helps. So India is more politically stable as a result of this election, is also going to be a greater friend to the democracies of the world.
Damian, I know one of your focuses is on India, Russia, and of course it goes back to Nehru's visit in 1955 to Russia and all the responses through the 60s of John Kenneth Galbraith and Kennedy trying to reaffirm an American presence from a distance.
That's absolutely right. And Professor Rajan, I'd really like to hear your opinion on the relationship between India and Russia. Obviously, they've been a big consumer of Russian barrels of Russian oil. And if you look at the 10-year and the correlation between the Indian 10-year and Brent crude, it is pretty strong and has been since 2000. So talk to us a little bit about that relationship, India and Russia.
Well, India sort of tilted towards Russia when the U.S. tilted away from India. India and the United States were quite friendly in the 60s. But then, as the Bangladesh situation developed, the U.S. tilted away from India. And that's when Russia moved towards India. There was a strong friendship through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. India buys a lot of military hardware from Russia, so it has been dependent. That has changed. India increasingly is buying from the West, from France, from the United States, and that relationship is strengthening. So this is a work in process. India understands increasingly Russia is going to be dependent on China, which is unfortunately. At this point, the relationship between India and China is one of antagonism.
Raghu, I've got time for one more question. I have to interrupt and be rude. If you are called upon by Mr. Modi, will you serve the Indian people within his new government?
Well, I think that's an unlikely prospect. My sort of inclination is whenever there's a government I can agree with, I'm happy to work with them. I've always been open with advice. Let's see what happens.
Raghu, thank you so much. We're really anticipating Breaking the Mold, 270 pages from Princeton University Press. Look for that from Professor Rajan at the Booth School at Chicago. We will feature Professor Rajan on our podcast, Single Best Idea, in its entirety today. Interesting to see right now the markets. We're trying to get back to them, negative 25. We've improved the tape, negative 16. The VIX 13.7. It is a lower rate environment. 10-year yield 4.36%. It's called the Sassower reset. Stay with us from New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. Paul Sweeney on the Gulf Stream, coming to you in 1 hour from Nashville with Alex Steele. They're at the BNY Mellon conference. Really going to be looking forward. I think, actually they got in last night. They're at the Pancake Pantry right now.
The Pancake Pantry, huh?
Pecan pancakes, the rest of it. I think they're probably getting the morning started as you do in Nashville, Tennessee. Damian Sassower in perfect timing, of course. with the EM tumult that we've seen. We got Brent Schutte coming up as well, Lisa with the markets. And just all I can say is that was really extraordinary in all the years of doing this with Raghuram Rajan to speak to him about his India and the challenges forward. And again, the book, Breaking the Mold, will be out. That I'm sorry, it could be a book of the year or the book of the autumn back to school. I'm not sure when it's coming out. Your thoughts on that interview, Damian Sassower?
It's just, I could have spoken all day long to Professor Rajan. I wanted to ask him about China. I wanted to ask him about Bhutan. I want to ask him about Tibet, South Tibet. I want to ask him about the conflict that's going on up north. That's a hot flashpoint. We didn't even touch on it.
We're going to rip up the script right now. We can do this with Damian Sassower. I mentioned the Ceylonese, which is Tamil Nadu, down by where Satya Nadella grew up. He was actually quite good at cricket, to say the least. But over to the east is Sri Lanka, Ceylon. And in your world, that's truly a frontier economy, right?
Well, Sri Lanka, yeah. Look, Sri Lanka, they're in debt to China because there's a big port there that China basically funds.
They're basically China funds.
That's Sri Lanka. But I'm talking more up toward Nepal. I'm talking more up toward, South Tibet. I'm talking more about some of these flashpoints. And it really goes down to Tibet. It comes down to, the world's largest reserve of fresh water supply. And, what does that mean for, a lot of the, adjacent states, of which obviously India and China are both. And look, there's been a soft war going on up there for a long, long time, and a lot of people talk about it, but we focus on these things.
Damian Sassower with us here. Lots to talk about. Again, we'll get to U.S. allocation here with Brent Schutte in a moment. We're on Apple CarPlay. Good morning worldwide on Apple CarPlay and Android. On YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast as well. The live chat, really, really valuable. We've got some guy in the chat moving around the Arctic Circle. I think he's got like dogs and, he's doing like the Alaskan, Malamute kind of thing.
But he's got his Apple CarPlay.
One place, he's on Apple CarPlay in Norway, like up where the northern lights are 24/7. Good morning. Above the Arctic Circle in Norway. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And right now we have futures falling. S&P and Dow futures down 0.2%. NASDAQ futures down 0.1% or 37 points. The 2-year yield 4.79%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.36%, down 2 basis points. Over to commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,334 an ounce. Over to oil, Brent crude $76 a barrel. We have WTI crude $72 a barrel. Today we'll get some insight into the jobs market. We have the monthly JOLTS data. It's released about an hour from now. Bloomberg Economics say it may show a job openings that fell over in April. GameStop shares, speaking of falling, they're lower. They're down more than 2%. That follows their 21% rally on Monday, and that was after that Reddit account drove the meme stock media in 2021. Well, it posted what appeared to be a $116 million position in the stock. And then you have Berkshire Hathaway shares up 0.5%. The New York Stock Exchange said it's going to cancel its bad trades following a software glitch that sparked those trading halts and falsely displayed 99% drops in the companies, including Berkshire. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. We migrate back to what we do, economics, finance, investment, trying to link it in across your kitchen table. People, I used to make a joke, people have a 201k. It's either they haven't participated in this great bull market or they got a 501k.
Well,
and, that's all there is to it.
What a great interview that was with Professor Rajan. And I'm looking at the India 10-year up 10 basis points here, above 7% now, Tom. So if you're looking for some yield,
the parsing here is China with embedded deflation is a low yield structure.
That's
and
right,
India is a more
2.3%.
conventional EM.
10-year in China is 2.3%.
Do you assume currency devaluation of the Indian currency off of that yield structure?
I don't. I really don't. Look, they've kept that FX cross to the U.S. dollar very, very stable, much the same way China has. I think you probably may have more of a chance of a deval in China than you do in India at this point.
Okay, well, Damian Sassower with us, and we're going to jump in now. I said the other day, can we just get Schutte on? I don't want to talk to him about Midwest baseball. I want to talk to the chief investment officer at Northwestern Mutual about what do we do here. Brent, if I have a short-term 3-year timeline, how do I digest the moment of June 2024?
You ignore it. So to me, there's a lot of noise in the near term. I think you've talked about the Indian elections. We have some of those coming up here in the United States, which probably serve to do the same thing. To me, over the next 3 to 5 years, you pay more attention to valuation. And so for the here and now, so we do pay attention to that. We do like fixed income because we do still think a recession is on the horizon, both cut inflation back to the 2% level and provide good returns for bonds. But for the next 3 to 5 years, you focus on valuation, which everyone has forgotten about the past 2 years. And you look to U.S. small and mid-cap stocks where they trade relative to U.S. large cap stocks at levels we haven't seen since the late 1990s, which ushered in a very good time period over the next economic cycle.
At Northwestern Mutual, is large cap, ginormous cash flow, are they blue chip 3-year holds?
Absolutely. We still own those, but I'm afraid that most people at the end of an economic cycle want to concentrate in the last economic cycle's winners. They often become the next economic cycle's laggards. If you look at history, think of Japan, think of U.S. large cap tech in 2000, think of China, emerging markets in 2000 the prior one, China, emerging markets in 2007. The next economic cycle is bound to be different and is bound to have different leadership based upon that different economic cycle, which we continue to believe are things other than U.S. large cap growth. That doesn't mean there aren't opportunities. I do think it means stock selection becomes more important and maybe active management has a chance again. But that, I think, is where you're going to have difference in the next economic cycle. And I just don't want people doing what I've seen people do in the 30 years that I've done in this profession, which is concentrating based upon the themes of yesteryear.
Brent, this is a data-dependent Fed, so that means payrolls, that means CPI, and I'm trying to get a gauge on which one's more important to someone like yourself. I mean, and I guess from that perspective, it's been services prices that are driving this, the inflationary kind of flare here. Just how important is tomorrow's ISM data, the services side?
It's important because the services side has held up the economy. You have an economy operating on one cylinder, albeit the most important cylinder. But if that services side starts showing weakness, that to me shows the economy more so is tipping towards a recession, which would then be confirmed in the labor market, which you are seeing weakness there. But once the Fed cuts rates, which I think is the labor market, it's often too late because the labor market tends to trend. And that's where I think we'll eventually end up, where you do see, unfortunately, some job losses, which will eventually cause a recession.
Brent, there's been a lot of focus on the ECB, understandably so, but there's some other central banks. I mean, Poland, no, forget about Poland, I'm kidding. Canada. Tell us about Canada. What is going on in Canada? Can Canada really cut this week?
I think all central banks, at least the developed markets around the globe, are in the same type of conundrum. They want to cut because they do see their economies weakening just a bit. And so they will likely do so. The market is priced in an 80% probability, just like the ECB. I believe there's a 98% probability.
Yep.
But I don't think they can cut all that much because you are later in an economic cycle where the unemployment rate is low and inflation tends to be stickier in that environment just because of wages, because of late cycle economic dynamics where businesses want to raise prices to keep up with their rising input cost. And so to me, there may be some cuts, but I don't think they're going to be substantial enough to stem a recession across the U.S. and for that matter, in a lot of developed economies.
Brent Schutte, I mean, there's trusses in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. One is a convention coming. One is the manager went to the Chicago Cubs. I don't know what that's about. But Brent, I got an unemployment rate back to the middle later 90s. I got an unemployment rate demonstrably lower than 5.x% of the pre-financial crisis. I mean, Milwaukee's job market is basically priced to perfection. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and in Milwaukee, I actually don't speak. I grew up in Chicago, so I listened to your past interview, and there was also St. Louis Cardinal talk in Chicago because I'm actually a Cardinal fan living in Milwaukee.
You're a Cardinal fan?
And I mean,
what happened? I mean, you go to Mike Schmidt's.
Tony La Russa happened, Tom.
What happened?
And they won. They actually win, although lately they've been struggling a bit. But a winning franchise historically, who doesn't want to align with that?
The steakhouse outside the arena in St. Louis. I went there once with a producer, and it's the Cardinals have the best steakhouse outside. It's like a Mike Schmidt stakeout. I don't know.
I'm going to save the interview. Brent, I need to ask you this. I'm looking at the summer here, and you said it, Canada can cut. I mean, I'm seeing some other central banks like Switzerland, like Sweden. It looks like the G10 central banks are starting to get a little bit more dovish. They're getting a little, the doves have some wind at their back here. What do you think there?
Certainly, I do believe there is a bit more desynchronization in this economy just because of the impacts of COVID and how we've different amounts of stimulus have been applied in different job markets. I mean, look, the U.S. to me is late in an economic cycle. That's the most important thing for a U.S. allocator. That has implications for asset allocation, which I think I've mentioned before. We want to own more fixed income because later in an economic cycle, you want to behave better. And you want to think about the opposite side of the equation. What happens next? Not what is happening now, Certainly that can continue where you want to own larger cap growth because of their cash flows. But the next economic cycle is likely to look different. And that's where we think that you're likely to see small and mid cap outperformance. Right. And you mentioned international. I mean, those currencies are fairly cheap relative to the dollar. Perhaps in the next economic cycle, we see a repeat of the 01 to 07 period where the dollar depreciated and U.S. investors in international stocks actually reap the benefit of not just price appreciation in those stock markets, but also currency increases. Because the translation back to dollars.
Brent, thank you. Brent Schutte, Northwestern Mutual. Right to it with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Tom, Damian, Lisa. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ruling party could lose its majority in parliament in India, forcing him to rely on allies to form a government. It's a stunning blow to a leader who has dominated Indian politics since he first took power a decade ago. Modi's BJP was leading in 240 seats, short of the 272 needed to form a government, and well behind the 303 it won in the 2019 election. Professor Raghuram Rajan with Chicago University.
I think the key number to look at in this election is the BJP's own seats in parliament. They almost surely will fall short of a majority, which means that they have to actually take the support of other parties, convince them to stay on board, which means they have to be much more sensitive to a broad-based set of policies.
Professor Rajan with Chicago University spoke to Tom and Damian just a few moments ago. President Biden plans to sign an executive order that would effectively prevent new asylum claims until migrant crossings drop by about 2/3 from where they are right now. And as of last April, border agents encountered about 4,300 undocumented migrants per day. We get more with Bloomberg's Bill Ferries.
You're talking about, almost more than half of the asylum seekers at the April levels, but we've had levels of 10,000 per day at some points in this crisis. So it would be a real sharp curtailment from what we've seen at kind of the peak periods of the immigration flow across the border.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. Opening statements set to begin any moment now in the federal gun case against President Biden's son, Hunter. A jury of 12 and 4 alternates seated yesterday. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Shout out. Viking cruise ships. They have YouTube. Good morning to all of you on Viking cruise ships across the Norwegian tundra, listening on YouTube to Bloomberg. I can't pronounce a single name on the itinerary. There's Isfjordur, Iceland, sail the Barents Sea. How am I doing, Lisa? Honigsvija, Norway, capture glorious vistas of polar bears.
Oh my
Good
God.
morning on the Arctic Circle. This is Bloomberg Surveillance from New York.
headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, we're still pointing to a lower open. S&P futures down 0.2%. Dow futures down 0.1% or 70 points. NASDAQ futures, little change, down 15 points. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.79%, down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.36, down 2 basis points. Intel shares, they're higher. They're up more than 1%. CEO Pat Gelsinger taking a shot at NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang at a trade conference in Taiwan as he fights for that top spot in AI. We have NVIDIA down about 0.2%. Apple shares, little change. Shares actually rose nearly 1% yesterday's trading, and that was enough to put the stock back in positive territory for the year. And new research from Stanford University, it shows more Americans making that super commute of 75 miles or longer. The Wall Street Journal says it's due to rising housing costs, pushing people further away from those big cities, and also hybrid schedules, because people, well, they don't mind taking the longer trip only a few days a week. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Lisa, thanks so much. My business flash is simple. The 10-year real yield comes down under 2.04%. It was the first thing I looked at this morning. Damian Sassower, to be direct here, we're range bound on so many yields, whatever the line is. We haven't really fallen through support or broken through resistance on so many fixed income measurements, have we?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, yesterday's move after the ISM data, though, was pretty significant. And I think, Canada caught a break here because, the fact is, if you look going into that meeting, the probability of them cutting rates was sort of more 50-50 than it is now. Now it's an overwhelming majority that are expecting it to cut.
Canada caught a break. The Oilers are in the Stanley Cup.
And that too, right? Exactly.
That's what
now
counts.
You're talking.
It's like real hockey.
Well, look, the Panthers' defense, my God, their forechecking and their ability to beat the Rangers on the board.
They really beat them, didn't they?
Can you name me a player on Florida? I don't think I can, and I watched the whole series because it was a team effort. It was defense. It was a clinic.
Very good.
Yeah, you like that?
Is that enough hockey talk, Rich? We got there? Julie Norman's about ready to hang up. Folks, we have Julie Norman on just because of time in this vamp that we just did on Stanley Cup hockey. I'm not going to harass her about Baltimore Orioles, best team in baseball. But seriously, this is the courage of Julie Norman of the University College London. She is without question one of the experts in the world on a difficult word, terrorism. And she has taken on the challenge of a book on the political history of Gaza. Professor Norman, honored to have you with us this morning. What is the political future of Gaza?
Oh gosh, Tom, I think that's the question that is on everyone's mind right now. And it's certainly the one that I think Biden is really trying to push Netanyahu on these days. Biden put out this ceasefire plan ostensibly approved by Israel, but part of that was to get the ceasefire and part of it was just to get Netanyahu starting to articulate what a day after might look like in Gaza.
Well, okay, but importantly, everybody's running for election and posturing for their domestic politics. Has the American relationship with Israel changed? Whatever the future is of Netanyahu or Prime Minister Sassower, whatever it is the future changed in American-Israeli relations?
I think there's two ways to answer that. One is governmental relations with Israel. And I would say at that level, whether it's president, whether it's Congress, we still see very strong support for Israel pretty much across the board. Obviously, some exceptions within Democratic Party representatives. I think where we're seeing the shift, though, is with public opinion, obviously with young voters, young citizens in particular, and really, on the more progressive wing, with the Democratic Party more broadly now split, essentially 50-50 on leaning more sympathetic towards Palestinians and more sympathetic towards Israel. So I do think that trend is going to continue, and it's one that lawmakers will have to grapple with as, in coming years a bit more than they have in the past.
Dr. Norman, I'm curious to hear your thoughts of what's going on south of the border. We had an election in Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum, Jewish, former mayor for the city, for Mexico City, a 30 percentage point win as president. Does that change Mexico's relationship with Israel at all?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously very notable that she is not only the first woman, but the first Jewish person to hold that office. But she has made statements before that, that she doesn't agree with Zionism. I think she does identify, in fact, as like an anti-Zionist. So she seems to be, at least up until this point, upholding what Mexico's stance has been as being very pro-Palestine, showing their dissatisfaction with Israeli policies. But again, she's been towing the line of her predecessor up until this point, and I think we're not really sure what many of her policies are going to be in general, simply because she's been kind of walking the party line. And once she's in office, we might see some changes.
Yeah, I'm getting that same feeling, Doctor. I mean, just the uncertainty surrounding what her appointment means as president. But, let's shift gears. Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about the IMF funding that they received last week. I mean, that's good news. But there's another sort of summit, another fundraiser booked with Biden. Talk to us about U.S.-Ukrainian relations. I mean, what do we expect there?
Yeah, so, I think it's a tough spot for Biden right now. Obviously, he got through the big aid package, 2 months ago. That was a very long time coming. I think that's going to be the last big infusion of military aid, at least that we see going to Ukraine anytime soon. And as the war goes on, I think Biden's getting to a point of, just as in Israel, trying to say, what is the end game here? What is all this going towards? And I think those conversations are starting to happen more.
Professor Norman, to your claim to expertise, and I'm not saying this to be snide or snarky, I think it's a serious question. Is Hamas defeated or trending toward defeated? How do you gauge that? How do you measure that?
Yeah, so this has obviously been one of Israel's main objectives, and the U.S. right now is assessing that Hamas has been sufficiently depleted in the sense that they couldn't carry out a massive military attack, they couldn't govern effectively, that sort of thing at this point. I would just say, though, Hamas is so many different actors all at once. They're a military operation, they are a political party, they're a social movement, and there's a lot of just everyday people who identify as Hamas supporters. So I don't think the movement itself is close to being wiped out. And honestly, I feel like many that after the Gaza war, they will probably be able to recruit quite effectively, or a group very similar to them will likely be able to recruit very effectively.
And Dr. Norman, talk to us a little just about, look, I can't believe I'm saying this, Russian relationships with the West, with the U.S. specifically. Talk to us a little bit about, what comes next for that country? What comes next for its relationships with the former Soviet states? I'm thinking Armenia, I'm thinking Azerbaijan, I'm thinking, quite frankly, Uzbekistan, and a lot of the sort of step out of China. Talk to us a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, sure. So I would say, obviously, I don't think things will change with the U.S., at least within these next 6 months, at least during the Biden presidency and with the Ukraine war. But with much of the rest of the world, including former Soviet states, including much of the global South, they have viewed this war very differently than the U.S. They have continued, trading with Russia, taking advantage of cheaper prices, and really trying to kind of straddle both lines. So globally, I feel like Russia is actually still doing fine with many states, and they will probably continue on that trajectory as anti-Western sentiment increases.
Unfortunately, Professor, we've got 45 seconds left. Since you bleed Baltimore Orioles orange, with the new ownership, should the Orioles be aggressive at the trade deadline?
Oh, I would just say I put all my trust in David Rubenstein. Like, whatever he thinks is best, I will trust him to do it. He's brought a lot of magic to Baltimore, and we're all just super excited.
Nailed it. Professor Norman just knows how to get back on the show. Julie Norman, thank you so much, and really anticipated is her most serious history about the political history of Gaza. Look for that next year as well. She just nailed that.
I think I can play first base for the Orioles now.
No, they're loaded. The only thing between them and the Yankees are just like, are they like 1927 Yankees?
It's going to be a fun season. This is early. It's still early. We're only 2 months into the season. Yankees have over 40 wins. The Orioles are right behind them, like a half
They're like
behind.
Legit behind them.
And in full disclosure, we know Michael Bloomberg has a minority stake in the Baltimore Orioles now, so we are huge Baltimore Oriole fans, and we're not rooting for the Yankees. Isn't that right, Lisa? No comment.
Say yes, Lisa. Put the Yankee, take the Yankee jacket off. We say good morning to all of you again into Jobs Day on Friday. We'll go beneath the headline data at 8:30. Tune into Apple CarPlay. Tune into YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcast. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Get it set up now to get to Jobs Day on Friday. How about a data check improving tape? Negative 24 on S&P futures. Now negative 13. Dow futures under 100, negative 69. The VIX 13.60. The yield space comes in. That is the headline. West Texas Intermediate, $73 a barrel. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Damian Sassower with your opening bell report. So we have more economic data on tap this week. A lot of it surrounding the labor market. Today we'll get to the monthly JOLTS data about a half hour from now. Tomorrow it's on to ADP's private employment report. That's followed by weekly jobless claims Thursday and then May payrolls on Friday. Ahead of this, let's get to the markets right now. We'll start with the S&P 500. We're off and running down about 0.1% at 5,274. We have the Dow down 0.3% or 116 points at 38,449. And then the NASDAQ, that is little change, down 7 points at 16,821. The two-year yield, 4.79%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.35%. That's down 3 basis points. Over to commodities. We have spot gold lower, $2,336 an ounce. Over to oil, Brent crude, $77 a barrel. WTI crude at $73 a barrel. April. At the open, I want to also check in with Intel. They're up about 0.8%. CEO Pat Gelsinger taking a shot at NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang at a trade conference in Taiwan as he fights for that top spot in AI. That is your Bloomberg Opening Bell report. Tom and Damian.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. This is such a joy. The team does just such a great job of dragging people in here. And I never know who's on Zoom, who's in studio. So to see Louise Yamada walk into the studio, coiffed in Hermes this morning, is just truly a treat. For Global Wall Street, this is without question our interview of the day. Let me explain. Her book, Market Magic, changed the way we think about bull markets. She was iconic at Smith Barney in a small bank called Citigroup, and is with, of course, her Louise Yamada Technical Research Advisors. Louise Yamada with Bloomberg Surveillance. Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
This is just a joy.
It's been a long time.
You invented distribution. I think of John Murphy, the work that Ed Hyman did, but particularly John Murphy is synthesizing economics, financials, and technicals, and they paid homage to you. Does the distribution now of the stock market suggest a continued bull market?
I'd like to take a moment, and I'd love to show you this if you can see it. I'm looking to see where it is.
It looks like a rainbow.
It looks like a rainbow. It is the Dow from 1900 to 1999 to 2006. And when that consolidation lifted,
right,
we could take.
This is working great on radio, Louise.
I know.
There's somebody just drove off I-80 outside Altoona. Okay, put the paper down, Louise.
Okay.
Let's start over.
All right.
Apple CarPlay, YouTube. Good morning, YouTube. My deepest sympathies. Are we in a bull market, and is it going to continue?
We're in a bull market. I think that there is a pause coming. And a lot of it has to do with interest rates, which I'd love to get to in a minute. But this chart on the Dow.
Am I doing the interview or is she running the interview? Continue here. On the stock market.
This breakout in the Dow in 2006 gave us targets to 20,000, 30,000, and the final target was 40,000. And guess where we are?
Well, look at where we are. And I got to be honest, you called this be in the market as one of your mantras. With that said, can you chart NVIDIA? Can you chart the madness of the magnificent 456?
Of course, one could chart all of them.
Right.
We have charted all of them.
Yeah,
Do
but
they look extended?
I'm going to bring in Damian Sassower.
We're going to use logs to define those charts.
Damian wouldn't know point and figure charting if it hit him over the head.
No,
Damian.
Well, Louise, I am reading your research on the structural kind of makeup of interest rates of the U.S. Treasury market and what it's going to look like on a forward basis. And it seems like, a lot of bond vigilantes out there, they're getting a little bit nervous about it. My question for you is, do you see the Treasury issuance over the next year, 2 years, 10 years, sort of pushing out other asset classes? And certainly from a foreign investor standpoint, the amount of foreign investors that hold our debt, the U.S. government's debt. Talk to us about that.
Okay. I'm going to back up a little, if you let me. And historically, interest rate cycles have been long cycles, 22 to 36 years. This last cycle was actually 40 years when we saw the breakout of interest rates through the 40-year downtrend from 1980. Okay, reversals from falling rates to rising rates have been, rising rates to falling rates have been very sharp inverted V affairs, whereas the reversals from falling rates to rising rates have been saucer affairs from 2 to 14 years. So in late 2022, this long-term saucer saw a breakout, and I think we have entered a new cycle, structural cycle for rising rates. And I think that since everybody's moment to moment, today's traders really have to go back and study 1946.
Then do what you do best. Bring it over, 1946, bring it over to the Fed. Is the Fed aware that the trend has changed, or are they still within the great moderation?
Have no idea.
Well, we're talking about regime identification here, Tom, and that's right in my wheelhouse. And, does this seem like the 1940s to you, really, Louise? Or does it seem more like the Paul Volcker, like it's going to take some sort of real sharp move by the Fed in order to cut inflation at the knees? What is it going to take here?
I think it's too early in this cycle, since cycles have been so very long. And I think that we've hit 5%. We could pull back to 4, 3, and as long as you continue to have the higher lows.
Right.
Don't go back to where we were.
Looking out
at
5 years or
0.1.
10 years.
Looking out as long as you like. In the mid-60s, you had interest rates at a plateau.
Everybody wants to know what you're thinking on gold. You've been following it for years. We've had a huge move in gold. Dennis Gartman on yesterday looking at gold and yen. Luis Yamada looks gold and dollar.
Right.
Is gold a continued bull market? Is there...
It looks like it. I mean, you've broken out through the old high around 2000, and on a channel basis, going all the way back to when gold was on its own, you could go. I think right now, if we see a slight new high, go to 2,800, possibly 3,000.
Are you seeing catharsis in the market where, within the parlance of point and figure, you see double high pull tops or double high pull bottoms? Is the emotion out there that sets up a trend?
For gold or for the
For everything in general.
Well, I think we're very short term. You're looking at some kind of consolidation, whether you call the 40,000, a point where we need to take some breaks and reconsolidate because we've hit our highest target. I think that's a real possibility. You could pull back to 38,000, 37,000. S&P similarly, but I think that the market has bifurcated a bit from a short and intermediate term momentum basis. They're all on sell signals, all three of them. A little less so for the NASDAQ, but even within the technology sector, you're seeing a bifurcation. You've got some going down, like an Intel.
I want to ask you about the technology sector because I'm not a market technician, but I heard last week there were some real, and I might butcher this, by the way, Louise, inside out, down days. Like there's some big moves in NVIDIA and in some of the Mag 7 last week from a technician standpoint, from a technical standpoint, that was quite bearish. Did your screens light up with a little bit of red there?
Well, you see an outside day. It means that you went
outside down day. I think that's what he said.
Outside down day. Okay, so you went above and below the prior day's move, and if it's an outside down day, you closed at the low. Which
is never a good sign for equities.
We need to wrap up here, Louise. We're so honored you're in here. To have Raghuram Rajan and Louis Yamada in one day is what the show is about. Are kids doing technical analysis, or have we so computered up that we've forgotten about a piece of pencil across the paper on a semi-log chart?
Well, we have a lot of people applying for the Chartered Market Technicians certification, so I think there are a lot of people doing it.
You still think there's an interest?
I think definitely there's an interest. I'm sorry to see so much day-to-day trading.
Can you come back with 300 pages again and put papers up in front of the camera for radio?
I would be delighted to.
Luis Yamada, thank you so much for joining us today. Luis Yamada Research, of course, forever at Smith Barney and at Citigroup. She would want me to quote the Dow first, 38,501, down 0.2% on a trading Dow. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Paul and Lisa. India has been counting more than 640 million votes cast over the past 6 weeks in the world's largest democratic exercise, which was widely expected to give Prime Minister Narendra Modi a third 5-year term. But it turns out to be much closer than predicted. Bloomberg's breaking news editor in Asia, Derek Wallbank.
We're in a situation where all of the exit polls over the weekend were projecting a pretty substantial landslide win for Narendra Modi. That really has not held true. I mean, he looks like his overall alliance is on track for a win, but his specific party might actually have to rely on allies to make up that majority. And that is very much not the position that he thought that he would be in.
Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank. Later today, President Biden plans to sign an executive order that would effectively prevent new asylum claims until migrant crossings drop by about 2/3 from where they are right now. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre spoke to reporters aboard Air Force One last night.
We are constantly and will continuously look at all options to try and really deal with the immigration system, a system that's been broken for decades.
As of last April, border agents encountered about 4,300 undocumented migrants per day. Hunter Biden is at a Delaware courthouse with his wife for his federal firearms trial. Opening statements kick off in the federal gun case against President Joe Biden's son. A jury was seated yesterday. Hunter Biden is charged with 3 felonies stemming from a 2018 firearm purchase when he was, according to his memoir, in the throes of a crack addiction. Finally, this is a big old oops. At one funeral home, authorities in Lincoln, Nebraska say a 74-year-old woman thought to be dead was later found to be very much alive at the funeral home. Lancaster County Chief Deputy Ben Hochin says funeral home staff conducted CPR on the woman, and she was rushed to the hospital where relatives were alerted.
I'm sure they'll look at see if new protocols need to be made or if they were all followed.
The sheriff's office is investigating, but no charges are pending. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. What a joy, Damian, to have in Luis Yamati here. Yeah. And, you know, the idea of a set of higher lows in yield sending out a 2, 3, 4 year trend where she gets us back to maybe where we were 20 years ago. I'm not sure that's in the Fed zeitgeist right
I
now.
don't think it is at all. I mean, to see rates go up. I mean, again, we talked about asymmetry and we talked about where the world is and where yields are. I think they're far more fairly priced today than we have been in some time. And so, you know, look, I think the markets are kind of saying that too. I think the chances of us having an outsized move to the upper downside has kind of come off. So we might have this kind of summer doldrum, low vol environment to extend for a bit longer.
What does it do to your carry here? I mean, all of a sudden, oil, we're looking at West Texas Intermediate. We could pop a 69 handle on that. Yields come in. Does that really adjust the carry game?
Well, I am happy you asked that question because, truthfully, it is still carry paradise. We've just lost about a full percentage point of return in carry this year. We're up 7.2.
You lost that, what, in the last 12 hours?
Yeah, pretty much since Mexico. And, basically Mexico and, for that matter, India. But I think, look, Mexico has been it's been paradise for carry traders this year. They're obviously feeling it.
Come on, it's over.
But it's over, and you're playing with the house's money in a lot of these markets again. So, I guess the one market we're not really talking about here is South Africa. And there's been an election in South Africa, and they're trying to build a coalition, and we're going to see how things shake out there. But that could be the one currency that people are underestimating here.
I got DXY 104.215.
Up 3.3% year to date.
It's up, but basically in the turmoil of South Africa, Mexico, India, the Sassower world, dollar strength is unchanged. Am I right?
The dollar shorts have been cleaned out in the last 4 weeks, Tom. I mean, seriously, like we had an overwhelming a short position in dollar on a tactical basis. Now the dollar's kind of, come off a bit. I think now we're far more fairly priced. Right. I think you could see dollar longs get back involved.
Are you going to be with us till 10 o'clock here, or do you have to leave for a tea time?
I have to do a TV hit at 10 o'clock, so I might have to leave a few minutes early. And then tomorrow I'll be back from 7 to 10. So to your audience, if you want to hear more of my nonsense, I'm right here.
Well, it's like, okay, it's good nonsense. I like what you said about remittances today, seriously.
I mean, it's serious stuff. I mean, it does really help these countries out.
It's good. Right now we get the markets open, trading a negative 43 in the Dow. VIX was negative 25, now pricing negative 12 as well. Excuse me, the S&P negative 12. This is Bloomberg Surveillance from New York.
Breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks, well, we've got red and green on the screen right now. Traders just awaiting readings on job openings, factory orders, any clues onto the state of the economy, also an outlook for interest rates. So we have NASDAQ down about 0.2%, down 44 points at 16,783. We have the S&P 500 down 0.1%, or 9 points at 5,273. And the Dow little changed, up about 8 points at 38,579. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.78%, down 2 basis points. We have the yield on the 10-year 4.35%, down 3 basis points. What's moving the markets? Bitcoin miner Core Scientific up 28 points right now, 28 28%. It received an all-cash bid by cloud computing provider CoreWeave for $5.75 per share. On the flip side, you have Bath & Body Works. They're down nearly 10%. Its forecast fell short of expectations, and it kind of overshadowed that better-than-expected performance in the first quarter. And then finally, some big airplane moves. Sources say Airbus negotiating that sale of more than 100 aircraft to China. We have Airbus ADRs. They're down about 1.5%. And then Turkish Airlines looking to buy 250 jets from Boeing. Boeing shares up about 0.6%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning. Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. We're going to go to Mr. Sweeney and Ms. Steele there in Nashville. We'll do that here in a bit, but we wanted to dive into one final view of what's next for India. Thank you to our team for just great Indian coverage of the election today, the shock of the announcements of the last 24 hours. Raghuram Rajan with us from Fiscal, Chicago was really special. That will be the entire feature of my podcast, Single Best Idea, today. But first, we wrap up with Derek Wallbank, very, very late into the New Delhi evening. Derek, just simply, what is next for Mr. Modi? What is next for election results over the coming days?
Tom, we're going to find out very shortly, I would imagine. There's some suggestion that Narendra Modi may speak, possibly within the next hour. There are not superlatives enough to say how closely I am interested in hearing what that man has to say right now. So one of the world's most powerful politicians who had just in a way kind of unchecked rule with big majorities, who has now had a pretty big setback, and who knows what he's going to say. I mean, I think we're all going to be on tenterhooks watching for that.
To be clear here, is it a parliamentary system like England equivalency where he needs to form a coalition?
Yeah, the magic number in India is 272. And right now, if you take all of his allies, including ones who sort of became allies in the last couple months, the current projection says you get around 290.
That's right.
Which is well less than the exits that we're talking about, like 350. The last two elections, though, Modi's BJP has been able to do this without help. Right, they've been well clear on their own, so they haven't needed anybody's help. This time, the BJP by itself is expected to fall short of that magic number, so they're going to need those allies to come through. Those allies may have a price that they would like to extract out of this, and we'll sort of see what that does. But that's new territory for Modi, not in the last 10 years.
Derek, how focused is the government, and for that matter, the central bank, on movements in the rupee here? I mean, do you see them coming into the market maybe to defend it at all if it tends to fall out of bed here?
Yeah, I don't want to get ahead of any sort of speculation on where they may go, but I do think that this I mean, we've had like, what is it, 5 red headlines through the India day today on the relative market gyrations that have been going on. I mean, I think this is just one of the biggest market stories in India. I mean, you're talking since COVID in terms of the movement. Like, so this is going to be really a big sort of thing, and it's going to play out in shocks for a little while, I would think. It's a little too early to say what policy actions may come as a result.
Derek, the last question I asked to Professor Rajan is if he was called upon, would he serve in some form of new Modi administration or coalition as well? With the speech he's scheduled to give here, and Bloomberg News will have complete coverage of that, folks, who is he speaking to? Don't tell me he's speaking to a nation of 20-plus languages. Who's he talking to? His constituency in the north? Or is he talking to the technocrats in the south?
It's a great question, Tom. I think right now he's talking to himself. I think that right now he's figuring out where he wants to be, and he's going to go any number of directions, but he's got a couple of big audiences. The first one of these audiences that I think is really, really critical is those people in that alliance, because he's going to signal where he wants to go. And right now he's got an immediate math question that he has to answer. The second thing is that he's going to be mindful of all of these market things. He's going to be talking to that larger sort of economic folks. He's going to be talking to some of the people who I think, you're talking about a 60-seat difference between where they thought they were going to be and where they are, right? Just from the exits to where we are. And so you might start hearing some conversations to those sorts of people as well.
Derek Wallbank with our coverage in New Delhi, with our entire team in Mumbai and in New Delhi. Derek Wallbank driving all of our South Asia coverage. And thank you, Derek, for the commitment today to Bloomberg Surveillance in your late and sweltering evening. Just a touch of green on the screen now. We are open for trading flat on the Dow. This is a joy. They are at the Gaylord Opryland Resort in Nashville. It's an important conference, the BNY Mellon Insight Conference. Thank you, BNY Mellon, for your support of Bloomberg Surveillance. And I mean, it's a sprightly start for, no pun intended, for Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele, because they were at the Pancake Pantry this morning. And Alex, of course, had the Nashville Sunrise, absolute grapefruit vodka, fresh pink grapefruit, fresh lime, fresh this, fresh that, and she had to listen to Post Malone as well. Alex Steele, how is Nashville?
It is awesome. You called me out. I clearly have all those things in my stomach now as we head to radio. So Paul and I are here in Nashville, Tennessee. We are broadcasting live from the Gaylord Opryland Resort. It's fantastic. It is humongous. Yes, I have an app on my phone that gives me directions a la Google Map. And we are at the BNY Mellon Insight Conference. We have 2,000 professionals, financial professionals. Right. They're going to get fresh intel on wealth management and all the strategy.
And Paul, this goes to what you
Tom,
talked
you missed
about.
The
Paul, with a delay, let me just say you spoke yesterday exactly about the boom in Nashville, of the many Nashvilles around the country. I mean, that's a theme here of a better than good America, isn't it?
It is, Tom, and you come to this town, and you know what is just amazing is how big the music industry is here, Tom. I know you know this very well from your days in the business, but it's just the music business is everywhere you look. The influence here with the Ryman Auditorium, the Grand Ole Opry, all the bars and clubs downtown Nashville that have live music every single night of the week. It's just a huge part of the fabric of this city, Tom.
That was great. Damian Sassower was coming in today, and he was listening to Megan Maroney. She's popping up the country charts right now. Damian, a question.
Well, Tom, Alex and Paul both know I went to Vanderbilt University. I spent my glory days in Nashville, Tennessee, but I didn't spend it at the Grand Ole Opry and Dolly Parton, capital of the world. I did it down at the Gulch, the West End, Broadway. Talk to us about, are you going to get into the city of Nashville at all? Are you going to visit my alma mater? Are you going to get to Vanderbilt at all?
Exactly. Alex was just asking me what we're doing after the show, and I said, we're going to go down to Vanderbilt. I want to see that campus. It's been a long time since I've been there. I know it's a phenomenal school, so we're going to go back to your old digs there, Damien.
Commodores.
Give me one recommendation if we wanted to get into Beverly Commodores.
The Bluebird Cafe and the girls from Vanderbilt pull up in their BMWs. And, that was a few years ago. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney in Nashville, an important time to be there to get the pulse of the nation into the jobs report that we'll see on Friday. And again, we thank BNY Mellon for all of their support. They're wonderful guests, but particularly BNY Mellon's Insight Conference. Again, thank you to them for their support. This has been an extraordinary day. We had the shock of India. Thank you to all of you across America for the briefings we've done with Derek Wallbank and particularly with Professor Rajan at the Booth School, Chicago. And I'm sorry, Damian, to have Luis Yamada in. It was just very cool.
Amazing. Awesome. What a day. I mean, we got it tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow.
It's very good. I mean, you're in Nashville. Nashville's changed. It's not, George Strait. They're afflicted by Sheryl Crow. Good morning.